Ronnie is riding in the front seat of a car with her mother and younger brother Jonah, feeling miserable and resentful. She believes her parents must hate her to force her to spend the entire summer in a southern beach town with her father instead of staying in Manhattan with her friends. What was supposed to be a visit has turned into a stay until late August, which she experiences as punishment or exile. During the 9-hour drive, she has felt like a prisoner being taken to a remote place against her will and cannot believe her mother is making her do this. While lost in her thoughts, Ronnie recognizes Mozart's Sonata No. 16 playing in the car, a piece she once performed at Carnegie Hall. Her mother had put it on while she slept, but Ronnie turns it off immediately, saying she does not like hearing herself play. Her mother tries to compromise by lowering the volume, but Ronnie shuts down the conversation and stares out the window, aware that her mother has gone silent in irritation. Her mother makes small talk about seeing a pelican, which Ronnie responds to sarcastically. Jonah joins in from the back seat, correcting Ronnie and insisting on having the last word, something that annoys her. Her mother asks if Ronnie slept at all, and Ronnie responds sharply, blaming her for hitting a pothole. The tension continues as Ronnie snaps gum deliberately, knowing it irritates her mother. She reflects on how boring the interstate drive has been and remembers complaining about it repeatedly while her mother ignored her. Ronnie notes that her mother dislikes driving and is tense in the car, though at home she is loud and confrontational, often yelling about Ronnie's grades, friends, curfew, and a particular incident. Ronnie believes her mother thinks yelling will make her care. Ronnie admits internally that her mother is not terrible and can even be a good parent, but she feels her mother treats her as if she has not grown up. Ronnie fixates on the fact that she will turn 18 in May and then will legally be able to make her own decisions, unlike now. Because she is still 17, she has no say in spending the summer with her father. No matter how much she protested, her mother decided that both Ronnie and Jonah would spend the summer with him, something Ronnie has come to resent deeply. As traffic slows near the bridge and Ronnie glimpses the ocean, she feels no excitement. She asks again why her mother is making them do this. Her mother repeats that they need to spend time with their father, who misses them, and emphasizes that they have not seen him in 3 years. Ronnie argues that this is her father's fault because he left, and her mother counters that Ronnie has ignored his calls and avoided him when he visited New York. Ronnie states outright that she does not want to see or talk to him. Her mother insists that he is a good man who loves her, which Ronnie challenges by pointing out that he walked out on the family. Instead of answering, her mother turns her attention to Jonah, who is enthusiastic about the summer. Ronnie complains that she wants to spend the summer with her friends, but her mother accuses her of wanting to spend nights at clubs and brings up her grades and curfew. Ronnie tries to redirect the conversation back to her father, but her mother ignores her, having already explained her reasons many times. Traffic stops again, and her mother wonders why it is so crowded. Jonah explains that beaches are always crowded, but her mother insists the time of day makes it unusual. Ronnie curls up in her seat, feeling overwhelmed and unhappy. Jonah then asks whether their father knows Ronnie was arrested. Her mother confirms that he does. When Jonah asks what their father will do, Ronnie responds bitterly that he will do nothing and only ever cared about the piano. Ronnie reflects on her history with the piano, which she now hates and has sworn never to play again. Music had once been central to her life, and her father, a former Juilliard teacher, taught her as well. She had been talented, recognized within classical music circles, and her success led to magazine articles and a feature in the New York Times, culminating in a performance at Carnegie Hall in the Young Performers series 4 years earlier. She acknowledges this as a significant achievement but now questions whether the sacrifices were worth it, believing that no one remembers or cares about such accomplishments unless they are famous in popular culture. She wishes her father had guided her toward electric guitar or singing instead of piano, which she sees as impractical. She resents the life her father chose as a concert pianist, traveling constantly, playing small venues, and eventually straining the marriage. She recalls her mother yelling frequently and her father withdrawing, until he ultimately failed to return from a southern tour. As far as Ronnie knows, he no longer works or teaches, which deepens her bitterness. Jonah excitedly points out a Ferris wheel, and their mother suggests there must be a carnival in town. Jonah asks if they can go after dinner with their father, and their mother tells him he will have to ask. Ronnie sarcastically comments about pretending to be a happy family, but both her mother and brother ignore her. Her mother suggests that Ronnie could accompany Jonah on the rides if their father does not want to. Jonah is thrilled by the idea, while Ronnie slumps in her seat, finding the entire situation depressing and unavoidable. Steve Miller sits at the piano in his beachside bungalow, playing with nervous intensity as he waits for his children to arrive. The piano is placed in a small alcove off the living room, and the few possessions he owns reflect his life. Photographs of himself as a child with his parents, of himself playing piano as a teenager, his college degrees, a certificate from Juilliard where he taught for 15 years, framed tour schedules, and several photos of Jonah and Ronnie. These reminders make him aware that his life has not turned out as he once expected. The heat inside the house makes him sweat, and though his stomach pain has eased since morning, he knows it will return. He has a long history of stomach problems, including ulcers, diverticulitis, and an emergency appendectomy while Kim was pregnant with Jonah. He relies heavily on medication and believes these issues run in his family. Since his father's death 6 years earlier, he feels as if his life has been moving steadily toward decline. Over the years, he quit his job at Juilliard, tried to make a living as a concert pianist, divorced Kim, lost his tour work, and eventually returned to his hometown, a place he never expected to live again. Now he is about to spend the summer with his children and has stopped trying to predict the future. Steve reflects that he feels ordinary in a world that values extraordinary people, and this realization leaves him disappointed with his life. Unlike Kim, who was outgoing, he has always been reserved and lacking the charisma needed to stand out as a performer. He sees himself as more of an observer than a participant and sometimes feels like a failure in the most important areas of life. At 48, with a failed marriage and distant children, he wonders whether it is still possible for him to experience the presence of God. He now believes that music was a way of escaping reality rather than engaging with it, and that the answer he seeks lies partly in the love he feels for his children, though he senses there is something more. When he sees Kim's old station wagon pull up, he briefly thinks about their past life together. Jonah runs toward him immediately, and Steve is struck by how much his son has grown and how much he has missed. They embrace, exchange remarks about Jonah's growth and Steve's thinness, and Jonah happily declares how excited he is to be there. Jonah praises the house, thrilled that it is right on the beach, and runs off to see the ocean. Kim approaches next, greeting Steve politely and commenting on how thin he looks. Steve notices Ronnie lingering by the car and is struck by how much she has changed, with her rebellious appearance contrasting sharply with the girl he remembers. When he greets her, she responds coldly by announcing that she will not play the piano for him. Kim scolds her, but Steve intervenes to prevent an argument. Ronnie then walks off on her own, and Kim struggles but ultimately does not stop her. Steve and Kim talk briefly, and for a moment Steve imagines what it might be like if they were still married. Inside the house, Steve pours them sweet tea while Jonah plays outside. Kim comments on the house's condition, and Steve explains that he is living there for free with the church's permission. They talk about how much the area has changed and then shift to Kim's upcoming wedding to Brian. Steve tells her he is glad she has found someone, and Kim explains how Brian interacts with the children. Their conversation turns to Ronnie. Kim describes Ronnie's moodiness, poor grades, rebellious behavior, and recent shoplifting incident. She explains that Ronnie missed every question on the SAT and has been difficult to reach emotionally. Steve listens, sometimes finding humor where Kim does not, but eventually apologizes for not being present during the past 3 years. Kim expresses her frustration and resentment that Steve chose to leave and pursue his own path instead of staying involved in the children's lives. Steve tells Kim that he believes Ronnie knows right from wrong and has not truly changed in the ways that matter. Before Kim can respond, Jonah rushes in excitedly to show Steve the workshop behind the house. Kim decides it is time for her to leave, and Steve suggests taking Jonah to the carnival later to soften the goodbye. Jonah accepts reluctantly, and Kim departs without seeing Ronnie again. Steve and Jonah go to the workshop, where Steve has been spending his afternoons working with stained glass. Jonah explores the space, fascinated and disturbed by the strange taxidermy creations left by the former owner. Steve explains that he is making a stained glass window for a church that burned down and that the previous owner taught him the craft. He shows Jonah a reference image of the risen Christ and invites him to help, which Jonah eagerly accepts. As they work, Jonah talks about church, school, and soccer, admitting that other kids make fun of him. He also tells Steve that Ronnie did not read his letters and no longer plays the piano. Jonah mentions Kim's explanation for Ronnie's behavior, which Steve reacts to with humor. Steve then suggests they go find Ronnie at the festival, and Jonah asks if they can ride the Ferris wheel. Steve agrees, and Jonah responds enthusiastically. Ronnie goes to the Wrightsville Beach Seafood Festival and immediately notes how crowded it is, with cars parked tightly along the roads and teenagers renting out their driveways. After buying a soda, she looks around and feels disappointed. She had hoped the pier would resemble a real boardwalk with permanent attractions and places to hang out, but instead the festival is temporary, cramped into a parking lot, and resembles a small, shabby county fair. The rides are run down, the booths overpriced, and the food greasy, which makes the whole place feel unpleasant to her. Despite her feelings, the festival is packed with people of all ages. She is jostled in the dense crowd and becomes uncomfortable, especially when she is squeezed between sweaty bodies. Looking for relief, she slips away from the rides and game booths and heads toward the pier, where the crowd thins. She passes craft booths selling items she finds pointless, such as seashell gnomes, but notices that people are clearly buying them. She accidentally bumps into a table run by an elderly woman wearing an SPCA shirt. On the table are pamphlets, a donation jar, and a box containing 4 gray puppies. One puppy stands up to look at Ronnie, and she briefly interacts with it. The woman explains that the puppies are safe and already adopted, and that the booth exists to help animals find homes. Ronnie donates a couple of dollars before noticing loud cheering from the beach. The woman explains that the noise is from a beach volleyball tournament and suggests Ronnie go watch. Ronnie decides to check it out. As she walks toward the beach, she notices the sun setting, the ocean glowing, families lingering near the water, and birds moving along the shoreline. She finds the volleyball court and observes that many girls are focused on 2 players on one side of the net. The players are athletic and attractive, especially a taller one with brown hair and a bracelet. Ronnie notices 2 attractive blonde girls watching them closely and immediately dislikes them. Although the team with the attractive players keeps scoring, Ronnie finds herself rooting for the opposing team. This reaction is influenced by her association of the winning players with privileged, entitled boys she has encountered before. Her impression is reinforced when one of the players flirts openly with the blonde spectators. Losing interest, Ronnie turns to leave. As she does, the crowd shifts suddenly, and a volleyball player crashes into her while chasing the ball. He grabs her shoulders to stop her from falling, causing her soda to spill all over her face and shirt. The player, the brown-haired one, looks shocked and asks if she is okay. Embarrassed and irritated, Ronnie snaps at him and pulls away. He apologizes repeatedly, but she leaves, aware that he is still watching her. She is upset about her soaked shirt, which reminds her of sneaking out to a Fall Out Boy concert with Rick the previous year. She recalls how her mother reacted angrily and forbade her from seeing Rick again, a rule she ignored briefly before realizing Rick's drug use and pressure made her uncomfortable. She reflects on how common drugs and alcohol are in her social circle, but she avoids them, especially after what happened to her friend Kayla, who was drugged and assaulted. That memory reinforces her determination not to lose control. At the pier, Ronnie tries to clean her shirt with a napkin, but it leaves flakes behind. Frustrated, she reflects on the improbability of the earlier accident and briefly thinks about the volleyball player again, acknowledging his attractiveness and the strange sense of authenticity she felt from him. She dismisses the thought and prepares to throw away the rest of her soda. As she turns, she collides with another girl, spilling soda all over herself again. The girl, dressed in black with piercings and heavy makeup, comments bluntly on Ronnie's misfortune. The two exchange sarcastic remarks, and the girl introduces herself as Blaze. They talk briefly, and Blaze suggests Ronnie buy a Nemo shirt to change into. Ronnie resists but eventually buys one, using it to slip past her father unnoticed. Ronnie notices three intimidating-looking men approaching through the crowd. Before she can react, Jonah appears and comments on her wet shirt. He tells her their father is looking for her. Ronnie asks him to lie, and Jonah blackmails her for money, which she reluctantly gives him. She then ducks around a booth, where she finds Blaze smoking. Later, Ronnie sits with Blaze on a bench near the end of the pier. Blaze listens as Ronnie talks about New York, and the conversation makes Ronnie miss home even more. Blaze agrees that the town is boring and talks about her own family problems, including her father's girlfriend and her mother's boyfriend. Blaze then urges Ronnie to follow her to see something. They join a crowd watching a street performance by the same three men Ronnie had noticed earlier. Two are break dancing while the third, Marcus, juggles flaming fireballs. Ronnie watches as Marcus manipulates the fire with precision, extinguishing and relighting it. Blaze explains that Marcus makes the fireballs himself and that she can teach Ronnie how. The performance escalates, with all three men juggling and kicking the fireballs as the crowd cheers and throws money into a hat. When the performance ends, Marcus kisses Blaze in front of everyone, then notices Ronnie and asks who she is. Blaze introduces her. Marcus lights a fireball and throws it toward Ronnie, startling her. A police officer intervenes, extinguishing the flame and ordering the performers off the pier, warning them not to return. The men leave toward the carnival rides, Blaze following them. Ronnie hesitates briefly, then decides to follow as well. Marcus assumes that Ronnie will follow them, because in his experience girls always do, especially new girls in town. He believes that the worse he treats girls, the more interested they become, and he considers them predictable and stupid. He is leaning against a planter in front of a hotel, with Blaze clinging to him, while Ronnie sits across from them on a bench. Nearby, Teddy and Lance are drunk and slurring their words as they unsuccessfully try to get the attention of passing girls. Marcus often ignores them, just as he ignores Blaze, who is nibbling at his neck. He is tired of Blaze and annoyed by the way she hangs on him in public, but he continues to keep her around because she is good in bed and knows what he likes. At the moment, however, he is more interested in Ronnie, noticing her purple hair streak, her body, her makeup, and her overall appearance, which he finds appealing despite the shirt she is wearing. Wanting Blaze out of the way, Marcus tells her to go get him some fries. Blaze protests that she only has a little money left, but Marcus dismisses her concerns and tells her not to eat any of the fries. He notices that she has been gaining weight and attributes it to her drinking. After he shoves her slightly, Blaze goes to stand in line at a food booth. Once she is gone, Marcus goes over and sits near Ronnie, careful not to sit too close in case Blaze returns. Marcus asks Ronnie what she thought of their show and whether she has ever seen anything like it in New York. Ronnie admits she has not. He asks where she is staying, and her vague answer signals to him that she is uncomfortable. He mentions that Blaze said Ronnie ditched her dad, and Ronnie responds with a shrug. When Marcus presses her, she says there is nothing to talk about and that she does not want to spend the summer here. Marcus tells her she should leave, then abruptly suggests going to Florida together, offering to take her to a place near Tampa and stay as long as she wants. Ronnie is shocked by the suggestion and points out that she just met him and that he is with Blaze. Marcus dismisses Blaze's importance, which makes Ronnie uncomfortable. She decides to go talk to Blaze instead. Marcus pulls out a fireball and claims he was kidding about Florida, though he knows he was not. He had made the suggestion to see how far he could push her. Ronnie leaves to find Blaze, and Marcus watches her go, unsure what to make of her. He notes that although she looks like someone who parties, she does not smoke or show interest in it, and he senses there is more to her than she shows. He speculates about whether she comes for money, considering her life in New York and her family's beach house, but also doubts she would fit in with wealthy people he knows. Marcus reflects on his hatred of people with money and remembers an incident from before he dropped out of school, when a wealthy student bragged about a new boat. Days later, Marcus burned the boat and watched it from a distance. He never told anyone, believing that secrecy is essential. He considers Teddy and Lance unreliable and weak, which is why he makes them commit crimes alongside him so they are just as guilty as he is. They have stolen alcohol, assaulted a man, and vandalized a synagogue under his direction. Though he does not like or trust them, they serve his purposes. With Ronnie gone, Marcus grows restless. He plans to eat his fries when Blaze returns and then wander around, expecting that something else will happen, as it usually does after a show. He notices Blaze paying for the fries with Ronnie standing behind her. He watches Ronnie until she glances his way, which is enough to make him think again about her sexually, assuming she would be wild with the right encouragement. Will carries the constant weight of a secret that never fully leaves him. Outwardly, his life appears normal. Over the past 6 months he has attended classes, played basketball, gone to prom, and graduated from high school with plans for college. He recently broke up with Ashley, though the breakup had nothing to do with the event that haunts him. Most of the time he keeps the memory locked away, but occasionally it returns with full force, unchanged and vivid. When it does, he sees himself running along the beach, grabbing Scott as Scott stared at a raging fire. He remembers screaming at Scott, who insisted it was an accident. It was then that Will realized they were not alone and saw Marcus, Blaze, Teddy, and Lance watching from a distance. Will understood immediately that they had seen everything. When Will tried to call the police, Scott stopped him, begging him not to and insisting Will owed him. The news coverage afterward made Will sick with guilt, especially because someone had been injured and he had done nothing. Although the church was being rebuilt and the pastor had recovered, Will remained haunted by what he knew. Scott's words, "You owe me," were especially painful, not only because of their long friendship, but for deeper reasons Will struggled with at night, wishing there were a way to make things right. The incident earlier that day at the volleyball game triggered these memories. It had been the girl he collided with, who reacted with direct anger rather than pretending it didn't matter. After she left, Will finished the game but played poorly, and Scott's glare reminded him of the night of the fire, unleashing the memories again. After the game, needing space, Will wandered to the fairgrounds and stopped at a basketball game booth. Ashley found him there and asked if he was avoiding everyone. Will denied it, saying he wanted to see how rusty he was. Ashley appeared dressed carefully and attractively, as she always was, someone who never lacked attention or preparation. Will took shots at the basket and made 2 in a row. Ashley commented on his playing and compared him to Scott, which Will rejected, explaining Scott was the better overall player. Ashley asked what he would do with the prize if he won, clearly wanting him to offer it to her. Will missed the final shot and declined the booth worker's offer to keep playing. He asked Ashley if Scott was still around, and they walked toward him together. Ashley suggested going back to her parents' house since they were out of town. Will refused, saying it was not a good idea and that he was tired. Ashley questioned him, asking why he no longer took her calls and what she had done wrong. Will insisted she had done nothing but avoided giving a real explanation. When Scott later confronted him about refusing Ashley, he mocked Will's excuse and urged him to take advantage of the situation. Will remained firm, saying he was tired and uninterested. Scott continued to push, calling Will crazy for turning down the opportunity, but Will refused to change his mind. They went to get food, and while standing near the condiment area, a box of fries was thrown at Scott. Marcus, Teddy, and Lance were nearby. The tension escalated quickly, with insults exchanged and violence imminent. Will sensed the danger immediately and tried to reach Scott as Marcus and his friends maneuvered around him. Just as the situation was about to explode, a girl stepped forward and shouted for everyone to stop. Her voice cut through the chaos. Will recognized her as the girl from the volleyball game, now wearing an oversized fish t-shirt. She focused on a toddler who had been knocked over, calming him and helping reunite him with his mother. As the crisis diffused, Marcus and his friends slipped away. The girl tried to stop Blaze, who told her she was going to Bowers Point before leaving. The girl's father arrived, clearly frustrated and concerned, but she refused to go home and walked toward the beach. The tension dissipated, and a police officer arrived shortly afterward. The officer questioned Scott and Will but found no immediate issue. He then recognized the girl's father and spoke with him, warning that Marcus was bad news and that the girl should not be around him. Will overheard the conversation and saw the worry on the father's face. Remembering the girl's kindness with the toddler, Will suddenly spoke up and told them where she had gone. The officer decided to go find her himself. Scott and the others were confused by Will's action, demanding to know why he said anything. Will could not explain it. He himself did not fully understand why he had spoken up, only that he had. Ronnie stands on the porch late at night, aware that under different circumstances, she might have appreciated the beauty around her. The sky is clear enough for her to see the Milky Way and Venus. The ocean moves steadily in the darkness, and shrimp boats glow faintly on the horizon. But she is furious, overwhelmed by what has just happened. Her anger is intense, rooted in disbelief that her father involved the police to bring her home. She considers running away to New York, calling Kayla, and figuring things out there, convinced it could not be worse than this. That option disappears when she realizes Officer Pete is still there, making sure she goes inside. She replays the moment when the officer singled her out at Bowers Point and told her he was taking her home. When she refused, he threatened arrest on vagrancy charges and said her father would have to bring her home. Only then did she understand that her father had asked the police to intervene. The humiliation hits her hard, especially because her mother had never once sent the police after her, despite their conflicts. Inside the house, the sound of her father playing a Grieg sonata fills the room. Ronnie confronts him angrily, accusing him of sending the police after her. He does not respond. She demands to know whether he did not trust her or simply wanted to control her. He quietly acknowledges that he knows she does not want to be there. Her anger escalates, and she shouts that she hates being there and hates him. He remains silent, which only enrages her further. In her fury, she grabs a framed photo of herself and her father at the piano and throws it across the room, shattering the glass. He flinches but says nothing, only telling her where her bedroom is. When he tells her he loves her, she briefly feels regret for what she said, but it fades when he resumes playing the piano as if nothing happened. In the bedroom, Ronnie changes out of the oversized Nemo shirt and thinks of the day as the worst of her life, even while recognizing she is being melodramatic. Meeting Blaze is the only positive thing she can identify, though she now worries that even that connection may be ruined after what happened. She throws the Nemo shirt aside and begins changing, only to be startled by Jonah entering the room. She learns that she is expected to share the room with him. Frustrated, she snaps at him, then immediately feels guilty when she sees him clutching his teddy bear, a sign of his vulnerability. She reflects on his health problems and how difficult things have always been for him. Ronnie softens and apologizes, explaining she is just having a bad night. Jonah talks about the rides he went on with their father and how the Ferris wheel is how their father found her. As they talk, Jonah asks if she misses their mother, and Ronnie admits that she does. Jonah says he misses her too and is glad Ronnie came home. Ronnie reassures him about their mother and comforts him until he settles. The next morning, Ronnie wakes early and is irritated to realize it is only 8 o'clock. She cannot fall back asleep because of the sunlight and the sound of her father playing the piano again. Remembering the previous night, her anger returns. When she looks out the window, she notices a raccoon on a bag of garbage and then sees bars on the window, which makes her feel trapped. She storms into the living room and accuses her father of locking her in. He calmly explains that the bars came with the house, meant to protect artwork. Jonah confirms this. Ronnie insists that her father cannot treat her like a child all summer and claims she is 18. Jonah corrects her, pointing out that she will not turn 18 until August 20th, which only angers her more. She tells her father that he gave up the right to control her when he left and demands that he listen to her. He finally stops playing, but when she accuses him of playing the piano constantly to pressure her, he simply responds that it is okay and offers her breakfast. When he mentions bacon, Jonah reminds him that Ronnie is a vegetarian, which further derails the argument. Ronnie delivers an ultimatum, saying that if he ever sends the police after her again, she will never speak to him, reminding him that she already avoided him for 3 years. She then storms off to her room and leaves the house shortly afterward. Ronnie walks along the beach in the heat, realizing she should have worn shorts. The festival is gone, leaving only trash behind, and the town feels small and limited, with few places that interest her. She considers getting a job so she can stay out of the house during the day. As she returns to the beach, Blaze suddenly calls out to her. Blaze jokes about the police officer and asks what happened after she left. Ronnie explains that nothing exciting happened. Blaze says she did not go home and instead stayed at Bowers Point. She then asks Ronnie if she has any money, explaining that she has not eaten since the previous morning and is hungry. Will works beneath a Ford Explorer in his uniform, watching oil drain while trying to ignore Scott, who keeps talking about the previous night. Since arriving at work, Scott has repeatedly argued that Will handled the situation with Ashley incorrectly. Scott insists there is a difference between hooking up and getting back together and claims Will misunderstood Ashley's intentions. Will disagrees, saying Ashley wanted to reconcile. Scott counters with what Cassie told him, but Will remains firm. The garage is hot and uncomfortable, lacking air conditioning despite his father's insistence on keeping the shop spotless. Will drinks water and tries again to explain that the situation with Ashley is over and done with. Scott continues, claiming he only wants both of them to enjoy the summer and pointing out that his own plans with Cassie were ruined because Ashley was upset. Will apologizes but shows little sympathy, which Scott doubts is sincere. As the oil finishes draining, Will moves upstairs to refill it while Scott stays below. While working, Will asks Scott if he noticed the girl who stopped the fight the night before and helped the little boy. Scott dismisses her rudely, mocking her appearance and reminding Will that he collided with her at the volleyball game. Will notes that she had to buy a new shirt, but Scott shrugs it off. Will admits he is unsure why he keeps thinking about her. He recognizes that she is attractive, but there are many attractive girls at the beach. It is not even her role in stopping the fight that lingers in his mind, but rather the gentleness she showed the child. That tenderness beneath her rebellious appearance stands out to him. He compares her to Ashley, acknowledging that Ashley is not a bad person but realizing how superficial she can be. Ashley categorizes people and things into rigid judgments, something Will had grown tired of. The girl with the purple streak, by contrast, does not seem to fit into such boxes, and Will senses that she does not place herself or others into them either. This difference feels refreshing to him. As the day continues at the garage, Will finds his thoughts returning to the girl more often than he expects. Not constantly, but enough for him to realize that he wants to know her better. He wonders whether he will see her again. Blaze takes Ronnie to the diner Ronnie had noticed earlier while walking through town. Ronnie observes that the diner has a distinct 1950s style, with a counter and stools, black and white tiled floors, cracked red vinyl booths, and a chalkboard menu that appears unchanged for decades aside from prices. Blaze orders a cheeseburger, fries, and a chocolate shake, while Ronnie, uncertain about the food and being a vegetarian, orders only a Diet Coke despite being hungry. Ronnie reflects that her vegetarianism is not about principle but about avoiding feeling sick, since thinking about where meat comes from makes her nauseated. Blaze relaxes in the booth and asks Ronnie what she thinks of the diner, explaining that she has been coming there since childhood with her father and praising the chocolate shakes. Ronnie declines food, and Blaze calls her out for lying about not being hungry. Blaze then asks about the previous night and wonders why the police singled Ronnie out. Ronnie explains that her father likely told the officer to find her and that the officer even knew where she lived. Blaze responds sympathetically. Blaze brings up Marcus, explaining that he never liked her when they were younger and that he used to be mean, but that things changed a couple of years ago when she needed someone and he was there for her. Ronnie responds indifferently. Blaze then explains her habit of replying "you too" when someone says, "whatever," telling a story about quitting gymnastics after a coach grabbed her arm and scolded her for saying the word. The waitress arrives with their food, and Ronnie thanks Blaze sarcastically for the story, though she laughs and enjoys Blaze's humor. Blaze asks Ronnie what the worst thing she has ever done is. Ronnie turns the question back on Blaze, who tells a story from her childhood about poisoning a neighbor's flower garden with weed killer as a prank, later regretting it deeply. Ronnie reacts with laughter and shock. When Blaze asks again, Ronnie admits that she did not speak to her father for 3 years and then confesses that she used to shoplift for the thrill. She explains that she was caught twice, went to court, and now faces dismissal of the charges if she stays out of trouble. Blaze dismisses this as minor and jokes that Ronnie is boring. Ronnie asks why Blaze did not go home the night before. Blaze answers simply that she did not want to and implies her mother is probably angry. At that moment, Marcus, Teddy, and Lance enter the diner and approach their booth. Marcus sits next to Ronnie while Teddy and Lance crowd in and immediately start eating Blaze's food. Ronnie protests, but Blaze allows it, and Marcus asserts control over the situation. Marcus makes crude comments about Blaze's family life, which Blaze tries to shut down. The 3 boys eat most of Blaze's food while she says nothing, and Ronnie notices Blaze's reluctance to stand up to Marcus. Blaze asks what everyone wants to do next, and Teddy explains that he and Lance have to work at their family's motel. Marcus mocks their jobs, describing Teddy plunging toilets and Lance cleaning sheets. Blaze adds details about the motel's guests. Ronnie asks Marcus what he does, and he replies evasively, eventually revealing that he lives at the motel. He offers no further explanation. Ronnie senses that Marcus wants her attention and interest. This impression is reinforced when Marcus lights a cigarette, blows smoke toward Blaze, and then asks Ronnie what she is doing that night. He invites her to a gathering at Bowers Point and emphasizes that there will be no police. Blaze studies the table silently. When Ronnie does not respond, Marcus stands up and leaves the diner without looking back. Steve carries plates of spaghetti to the table while Jonah studies a photograph near the piano. Jonah asks if the picture shows Steve with his grandparents, and Steve explains it is his parents. Jonah remarks that Steve looks like his grandfather and asks if Steve misses him. Steve answers that of course he does. Jonah says he would miss Steve, and Steve reflects on the day, which has been calm and satisfying. They spent the morning at the shop, where Steve taught Jonah to cut glass, ate lunch on the porch, collected seashells, and planned an evening walk on the beach to look for spider crabs. At dinner, Jonah asks whether Ronnie will come home soon. Steve says he hopes so. Jonah mentions that Ronnie sometimes stays out late and asks if the police officer will bring her home again. Steve looks out at the approaching dusk and says no, not tonight. After their beach walk, Jonah showers and goes to bed. Steve tucks him in, thanks him for the day, and tells him he loves him. Jonah asks whether Steve's father ever took him to look for spider crabs. Steve says no and explains that his father was not that kind of father, describing him as complicated. At the piano later, Steve remembers visiting his father in the hospital years earlier. He recalls telling his dying father that he loved him and did not blame him for anything. His father, despite being clear-minded, responded coldly, saying Steve sounded like a woman. Steve remembers the hospital room, the 4 lines, his father's physical decline from cancer, and the heart monitor that made it seem as if his father might live longer than he did. That night, Steve spoke on the phone with Kim, who asked about his father and whether anyone else had visited. Steve said no one had. She asked if Steve had told his father what she had suggested and whether his father had said he loved him back. While standing in his father's house, looking at dusty family photos his mother had arranged, Steve lied and told Kim that his father had said he loved him. Steve recalls his childhood home. A small ranch-style house, a front-yard vegetable garden that annoyed neighbors, and a father who could fix almost anything. His father was a skilled carpenter and repairman who responded to late-night calls for help, quietly leaving the house and returning with payment left under a carved statue. His parents showed little outward affection, rarely arguing and never kissing in front of him. Poker was his father's passion. He played for hours at lodges, viewing the game as a science and emphasizing the importance of lying and recognizing lies. Over time, his father stopped heavy carpentry work and evening calls but continued to pay his bills, even affording medical care later in life. Saturdays were for chores and home improvements, Sundays for church and solitude, and the routine repeated weekly. Steve remembers that his father never taught him poker. Steve learned on his own and was average at it. After college, when Steve visited home after 2 years away, his mother hugged him while his father shook his hand. That night, His father prepared to go play poker as usual, despite his mother urging him to stay or take Steve along. Steve agreed to go, and his father briefly smiled before accusing Steve of lying. Steve recalls his mother's sudden death from a brain aneurysm and another hospital scene with his father, who questioned why Steve was there and suggested he leave. His father accused Steve of wanting others to make decisions for him and implied that Kim, not Steve, wanted him there. Back in the present, Steve hears a car outside and briefly hopes it is Ronnie returning. But it is not. It is past midnight, and he wonders whether he should look for her. He remembers attending marriage counseling with Kim years earlier, where the counselor suggested that Steve had learned to suppress his emotions because of his upbringing and that he expressed feelings only through music. When asked how events made him feel, Steve struggled to answer, believing actions mattered more than emotions. Now, standing on the porch under moonlight, Steve watches the beach and worries about Ronnie, though he trusts her judgment. He wonders whether she will disappear again the next day and whether the summer will repeat this pattern. He thinks about how meaningful his time with Jonah has been and wishes for the same connection with Ronnie. Steve returns inside and sits at the piano. As he does, he experiences the same sensation he once tried to describe in counseling. He feels empty. Later that night at Bowers Point, most of the people drift away until only the familiar five remain: Ronnie, Blaze, Marcus, Teddy, and Lance. Earlier, a larger group had gathered, but once the alcohol took effect, the night became repetitive and dull for Ronnie. She stands alone by the water while Teddy and Lance smoke, drink, and toss fireballs at each other near the bonfire. Blaze is drunk, slurring her words and clinging to Marcus. Ronnie is tired and already planning to sleep late the next day and block out the morning sunlight at home. She also thinks about Blaze's suggestion that they spend the next day at the beach together, which had seemed appealing. Earlier in the day, they had walked through local shops, visited a music store, and gone to Blaze's house to watch the Breakfast Club while Blaze's mother was at work. Blaze's behavior changes as she drinks, paying less attention to Ronnie and focusing on Marcus. Ronnie reflects that she neither likes nor trusts Marcus. She senses something wrong about him, as though normal behavior is something he performs to manipulate others. Teddy and Lance also make her uncomfortable, but Marcus unsettles her the most. She thinks about Blaze's house, which had seemed normal and cheerful, with a note and money left out by Blaze's mother so Blaze would know she was safe even if she didn't come home. Ronnie finds this odd. She wants to warn Blaze about Marcus but knows it would likely be useless, based on her experience with Kayla. She hopes she might be able to talk to Blaze the next day. Marcus approaches Ronnie at the water's edge, holding a fireball. He asks if she wants a beer, and she says she doesn't drink. When he presses her, she gives no explanation. He mocks her and asks if she thinks she's better than them. She denies it and refuses to sit by the fire. Marcus notices Blaze getting another beer and steps closer to Ronnie, grabbing her waist and suggesting they walk the beach. Ronnie tells him to stop and take his hand off her. He keeps his grip and suggests Blaze wouldn't care. Ronnie pulls away and says she does care and that she's leaving. Marcus loudly pretends that she had invited him along. Shocked and shaken, Ronnie walks away quickly, knowing Blaze is watching. When Ronnie gets home, her father is playing the piano. She tries to avoid him, but he asks if she's okay. She says she doesn't want to talk about it. He accepts this and offers pasta if she's hungry, without lecturing her. Surprised, Ronnie goes to her room. She forgets to cover the windows, and the next morning the sunlight wakes her after less than 6 hours of sleep. Remembering the night before, she feels unsettled and decides she needs to talk to Blaze. She showers, packs beach items, and hears her father playing pieces she once performed at Carnegie Hall. She assumes he's trying to connect with her and is irritated. As she tries to leave, her father asks to talk about the previous night and asks where she's been. She refuses to answer and says she has things to do. He presses, asking when she'll be back, and Jonah asks questions as well. Frustrated, Ronnie snaps at her father for playing her old piano pieces, accusing him of trying to manipulate her into playing again. He says the music has nothing to do with her and that it helps him feel better. Ronnie explodes, saying she hates the piano and hated having to play every day. She grabs Jonah's Pop-Tart and storms out. After searching for Blaze, Ronnie finds her in the same music store they visited the day before. The store is filled with CDs, vinyl records, signed 45s, and listening stations, run by an older man with long gray hair who knows music deeply. Ronnie enters, hoping Blaze may not remember the previous night clearly. Blaze immediately accuses Ronnie of betraying her friendship. Blaze claims Ronnie asked Marcus to walk with her and tried to kiss him. Ronnie denies it, insists Marcus lied, and says she doesn't like him at all. Blaze refuses to believe her, says whatever, and leaves the store. Ronnie is left alone, unsure what to do next. She doesn't want to go to the beach or home and has nowhere else to go. As she reaches the exit, an alarm sounds. The store owner rushes toward her and asks for her bag. Ronnie hands it over, believing a mistake has been made. The man removes CDs and signed 45s from her tote bag, items Blaze had been holding and had taken from the wall. Ronnie realizes Blaze deliberately planted the stolen items in her bag. As she becomes dizzy with shock, the man tells her the police are already on their way. Steve and Jonah spend the morning closing off the piano alcove using plywood and 2x4s. The wall is crude and uneven, something Steve knows his own father would have disapproved of, but he believes it serves its purpose. He reflects that the cottage will eventually be torn down anyway, since the land is more valuable than the small bungalow surrounded by large houses. After finishing, Steve hangs a photograph of Ronnie and Jonah on the new wall and asks Jonah what he thinks. Jonah bluntly points out that the wall is ugly, crooked, doesn't match the rest of the room, and means Steve can no longer play the piano. Steve explains that he built it because Ronnie didn't want to see the piano. Jonah questions the logic and jokingly suggests building a wall around his homework desk. Their conversation turns to food and kite flying, and Steve promises Jonah they can fly the kite all afternoon. They go outside, and Steve sits on a dune watching Jonah run along the beach as the kite flies overhead. He feels pride watching his son and thinks about his own childhood, when neither of his parents ever joined him in such activities. He reflects on his parents. They provided for him materially and were never abusive, but they were emotionally distant. His mother, originally from Romania, worked hard, spoke limited English, and was deeply religious. His father was stoic and practical. Steve recalls how his life changed when he discovered piano music at a Baptist church as a child, eventually studying under Pastor Harris, who became an important figure in his life. Although his mother disapproved of the Baptist church and piano lessons, she never stopped him, and Steve remains grateful to her for that. As clouds gather, Steve notices familiar tracks in the sand and calls Jonah over. He shows Jonah a loggerhead sea turtle nest and explains what it is, emphasizing that the turtles are endangered and must not be disturbed. While explaining extinction, Steve hears the phone ringing inside the house and rushes to answer it. Ronnie is on the line, calling from the police station and asking him to pick her up. Steve agrees immediately. At the police station, Officer Pete Johnson explains what happened. Ronnie insists repeatedly that she did not steal anything and does not want to talk about it. Jonah comments that their mother will be mad, which upsets Ronnie. She firmly tells both Jonah and Steve that she did not do it and begs her father to believe her. Steve remembers past conversations with Kim about Ronnie's behavior and considers the people Ronnie has been spending time with. After a moment, he tells Ronnie that he believes her. Back home at dusk, Steve checks on the turtle nest. The evening is calm and beautiful, with dolphins visible offshore. He delays calling Kim and sits near the nest, thinking. Ronnie approaches him quietly and asks if he is mad at her. He says he is not. He explains the turtle nest and how raccoons can destroy it, recalling a similar experience from his childhood. Ronnie mentions seeing a raccoon recently, and Steve says he plans to call the aquarium to have the nest protected. For the night, he says they will have to trust that nothing happens. Ronnie asks why Steve believed her. He tells her it is because he trusts her. She asks if that is why he built the wall to hide the piano. Steve tells her he did it because he loves her. Ronnie sits beside him, and they talk quietly. Steve explains that the stolen records are valuable, and that he does not yet know what will happen. Ronnie asks if he has told her mother, and he says he probably will. Ronnie expresses concern about the turtle eggs, and Steve asks what she wants to do. Later that night, after Jonah is in bed, Steve checks on Ronnie, who has decided to sleep outside to protect the nest. Steve has bought her basic camping supplies. Though uneasy, he allows it, trusting her judgment and knowing she is close enough to the house for him to hear if something goes wrong. He reflects on their earlier conversation and the years he has lost with her. Steve checks on Ronnie again under the night sky, watching her sleep near the nest. He feels the weight of lost time and love. After ensuring the beach is empty, he goes back inside, tries to distract himself, and eventually goes to bed. He falls asleep quickly but wakes an hour later and goes outside once more to check on his daughter. Ronnie wakes up in pain after sleeping outside. Her back, neck, and shoulder ache badly, and the sun is already bright and low over the ocean. She notices people walking dogs and jogging along the beach and thinks about how miserable sleeping on the ground is. Remembering why she slept there, she checks the turtle nest and feels relief that it hasn't been disturbed. As the pain fades, she remembers Blaze and what happened at the music store. The reality of being arrested for serious shoplifting hits her again, and she replays the humiliation of the manager, the police ride, and calling her father. She feels sick thinking about her mother finding out and fears being grounded for a long time, especially since the situation is worse than her previous incident. She gathers her sleeping things and carries them to the back porch so the neighbors won't see that she slept outside. She worries they would call the police again. After making 2 trips, she realizes she left her copy of Anna Karenina near the nest. When she goes back to get it, she notices a man in a work jumpsuit labeled Blakely Breaks, carrying yellow tape and wooden stakes. As he gets closer, she recognizes him as the guy from the volleyball court who ran into her earlier. He explains that he's there because the aquarium received a call about a loggerhead turtle nest. He volunteers with the aquarium and works at his dad's break shop. She points out the nest, and he explains that storms can destroy nests and that loggerheads are endangered, with only 1 in 1,000 surviving to adulthood. She tells him she knows this because her dad explained it. He introduces himself as Will and makes casual conversation. Ronnie remains guarded and doesn't give her name. They talk briefly about the volleyball incident with some awkward back and forth. Will begins marking the nest with tape and stakes so a protective cage can be installed later. Ronnie insists that the aquarium must protect the nest immediately and tells him to say that she saw a raccoon nearby. He agrees to call. Her father comes onto the porch and calls her in for breakfast. Will realizes she lives there and asks her name, but she still doesn't tell him before going inside. In the kitchen, her father is cooking a vegetarian breakfast burrito with tofu, rice, and beans. Ronnie is surprised by the effort and asks whether he has spoken to her mother. He tells her he hasn't and that he wants to wait until he has all the details from the police. He even offers not to tell her mother unless Ronnie wants him to. Ronnie agrees it's better to wait. He serves her food and coffee, mentioning that Jonah said she likes Starbucks. Ronnie asks why he's being so nice, and he answers simply that there's no reason not to be. Jonah joins them, suspicious that no one is angry, which feels strange to him. Ronnie reassures him that the turtle eggs are fine. After breakfast, Ronnie naps, then later showers and goes out to look for Blaze. She checks Blaze's house, the diner, and the music store, careful not to attract attention. She eventually spots Blaze on the beach and confronts her directly, demanding she tell the police the truth. Blaze denies everything and claims she told the police Ronnie was responsible. Ronnie realizes Blaze is lying and willing to let her take the blame. Ronnie sits alone on the pier as evening falls, thinking about Blaze's betrayal and Marcus's possible role. She watches couples and fishermen, reflecting on relationships and her own cynicism after her parents' divorce. When it gets dark, she heads home but chooses to walk through town instead of the beach. Near the diner, she encounters Marcus alone. He blocks her path, mentions her trouble with Blaze, and claims he might be able to help if they become friends. Frightened, Ronnie runs away, eventually realizing he isn't following her. She sits on her porch to calm down before going inside. She thinks about Marcus and Blaze and how dangerous Marcus feels to her. Inside, her father asks how things went, and she lies, saying she didn't get a chance to talk to Blaze. They eat dinner together quietly, and later her father reads the Bible while she reads Anna Karenina. Jonah goes to bed, and her father tells Ronnie he's glad she's there. She kisses him on the cheek for the first time in 3 years. In the bedroom, Ronnie feels overwhelmed and starts crying quietly. Jonah notices but doesn't mind. As she changes, she looks out the window and sees a raccoon heading toward the turtle nest, which is still only marked with caution tape. She drops everything and runs outside, screaming and waving her arms. The raccoon retreats and disappears. Her father and Jonah come onto the porch, asking what happened. Ronnie tells them that the cage hasn't been put up yet. Ronnie storms into Blakely Breaks shortly after the shop opens and confronts Will angrily. She accuses him of failing to call the aquarium to have a protective cage put over the turtle nest, saying she had to sleep outside again because a raccoon returned. Will is confused and insists he did call. When she snaps at him and storms out, Will leaves work abruptly, asking Scott to cover for him, and drives to the beach. Will finds Ronnie by the dune near the nest, still furious. She explains that she spent another night outside guarding the eggs because the raccoon came back and nearly reached the nest. Will tells her that he did call the aquarium twice and also spoke directly to the director that morning. He explains that the volunteers are scheduled to put up the cage first thing the next morning, but they couldn't come earlier because there are multiple nests on the island. Ronnie listens, skeptical, and says it doesn't help her turtles for that night. She walks back to her house, leaving Will behind. As Will returns to work, he realizes he likes Ronnie and cares about what she thinks of him. He reflects that she keeps surprising him and that he wants her to have a good impression of him. Throughout the day, his thoughts keep returning to her, sensing something genuine and caring beneath her sharp exterior. That night, Will finds Ronnie sitting by the nest in a beach chair, reading by lantern light. She is distant and cold toward him, but he stays anyway, saying it's a public beach. They exchange sarcastic remarks, and eventually he asks her name. She tells him it's Ronnie, short for Veronica. She explains that she lives in New York with her mother and brother and is spending the summer with her dad, now stuck guarding turtle eggs. Will says he stayed because he didn't want her to be alone at night and offers to protect her if needed. They sit together watching the waves. Ronnie asks Will about himself, and they trade light banter. She questions his southern lifestyle, and he jokes about stereotypes. They walk along the beach together toward the pier. The silence between them is comfortable, and Will notices her collecting shells and studying them carefully. He compares her unpredictability to his ex-girlfriend Ashley and imagines a future walking the beach with Ronnie. When they return to the house, Ronnie goes inside to talk to her dad, while Will sets up his own sleeping gear near the nest. She waves goodnight to him, and Will feels hopeful that something might be beginning between them. The next morning, Will wakes to Jonah questioning him. Ronnie comes out, amused, but Jonah reveals that Will had told Officer Pete that Ronnie went to Bowers Point, which contributed to trouble with her parents. Ronnie storms into the house upset. Will chases after her, apologizing and trying to explain. She tells him to leave her alone and says they have nothing in common. Will points out the things he's noticed about her, how she stopped the fight, helped the crying child, reads Tolstoy, and cares about turtles. He asks her to come with him to see something, promising she'll like it. She doesn't refuse. Will takes Ronnie to the aquarium before it opens. He leads her through quiet corridors and shows her tanks normally unseen by the public. They stop at a tank containing a wounded loggerhead turtle named Mabel, who lost part of a flipper after being hit by a boat. Will explains her condition and uncertain future. Ronnie is deeply affected. He tells her he wanted her to see Mabel because he thought she would like her, scars and all. They spend time at the aquarium, then go fishing together. Will teaches Ronnie how to reel in a fish, and she panics and screams when one splashes near the dock. They laugh together as they release it back into the water. They continue fishing, talking about their lives, families, and differences between New York and the South. Later, Will takes Ronnie to lunch in Wilmington, and afterward they return to her house, where the turtle nest is now protected by a wire cage. Will explains how turtle nests hatch and describes the process. Ronnie says she wants to be there when it happens. They talk playfully about parents, school, clothes, hunting, and volleyball. Will invites her to watch him play volleyball, and after teasing him, Ronnie agrees. As they walk toward the pier together, they nudge each other and joke, and Ronnie smiles, clearly enjoying what is happening between them. Ronnie sits watching Will and Scott play volleyball and reflects on how unexpectedly the day has unfolded, from fishing with Will to seeing the injured turtle at the aquarium. As she watches Will play shirtless, she finds herself thinking that maybe the summer won't be so bad after all. She considers that although Will isn't her usual type, he is smarter, motivated, athletic, kind to his family, and not a pushover. What unsettles her most is not knowing why he likes her. While she watches the game, Ashley, a blonde girl Ronnie recognizes from the carnival, sits beside her and introduces herself. Ashley casually mentions that she has known Will since childhood and implies that Will has a pattern with girls. She accurately guesses that Will spilled soda on Ronnie, took her fishing, and brought her to the aquarium, explaining that this is what he always does when getting to know a new girl. Ashley frames Will as charming but incapable of commitment, saying many girls have fallen for him and that she herself did as well. She implies that Ronnie is simply the next new girl. Ronnie is shaken by what Ashley says and becomes convinced she misjudged Will. She notices several girls watching him play and feels foolish and humiliated. Unable to handle it, she leaves abruptly. Back at her room, she begins packing to leave and tells her father she wants to return to New York. She explains that she doesn't belong there and doesn't fit in. Her father says he can't let her leave immediately because of the unresolved shoplifting incident and promises to contact Officer Johnson to see if it would be allowed. Ronnie asks her father to promise that he will let her go if possible, and he agrees, though clearly disappointed. There is knocking at the door, and Ronnie realizes it is Will. She insists on handling it herself. When she opens the door, she slams it shut again, refusing to talk to him and accusing him of playing games. Will continues knocking, saying he won't leave until she talks to him. Ronnie ignores him, and later she helps her father make dinner. Her father comforts her, and she briefly breaks down in his arms. Later that night, Ronnie tries to read but can't concentrate because Will is still outside on the beach, sitting near the dune. Jonah repeatedly watches him from the window, fascinated, and keeps commenting on how strange it is that Will is still there. Eventually, Ronnie loses patience and goes outside to confront him. She tells Will that he should leave and that he has upset her brother. Will asks what happened and pushes her to explain. He specifically asks what Ashley said to her, revealing that he noticed them talking. Ronnie tries to dismiss it, but Will presses her, saying that Ashley is his ex-girlfriend of 2 years and that they are no longer together. Ronnie begins to realize that Ashley may have been trying to sabotage her out of jealousy and fear of losing Will. Before Ronnie can respond, Will becomes frustrated, saying he thought Ronnie was different, and walks away down the beach. As he leaves, Ronnie notices a flickering fireball down the beach and realizes Marcus is there. Fear overtakes her as she imagines him sneaking toward the turtle nest and remembers how much he scares her. She considers calling Will back but decides against it, not wanting Marcus to associate her with Will or to stay outside longer. Ronnie steps into the porch light and deliberately stares toward Marcus, refusing to show fear. She stands her ground as the fireball disappears and Marcus does not approach. After a tense wait, she turns and goes back inside. Once inside the house, she leans against the door and realizes her hands are shaking. At Bowers Point late at night, Blaze begs Marcus to go with her to the diner before it closes. Marcus refuses, saying he isn't hungry. They are there with Teddy and Lance, who have picked up 2 girls Marcus finds unattractive and are getting them drunk. Marcus is already irritated that Teddy and Lance are around at all, and Blaze has been bothering him for over an hour, asking where he has been all day. Marcus suspects Blaze knows his absence had something to do with Ronnie. He is aware that Blaze is not stupid and that she had always known he was interested in Ronnie. This explains why Blaze planted the CDs in Ronnie's bag at the music store. Marcus recognizes that Blaze's actions were meant to scare Ronnie away and force her to keep her distance. What angers him is that this also meant he lost his chance to see Ronnie. Blaze continues whining that she doesn't want to go to the diner alone. Marcus snaps at her harshly, telling her to shut up and accusing her of never listening to him. Blaze quiets down, sulking, clearly wanting him to apologize. Marcus has no intention of doing so. He turns toward the water and lights his fireball, stewing in his anger. He is angry that Blaze is there, angry that Teddy and Lance are there, angry that he has no peace and quiet, and angry at himself for feeling this way. The anger makes him want to hurt something, and when he looks at Blaze pouting, he briefly imagines her as the target. He turns away, wanting to drink and think without being crowded. Marcus reflects that he wasn't initially angry at Blaze for what she did. When he first learned she had framed Ronnie, he had actually been pleased, believing it might push Ronnie closer to him. He thought Ronnie would realize Marcus was her only way out of trouble. However, when he approached Ronnie with that idea, she reacted as if he repulsed her completely. Marcus refuses to accept rejection and assumes she would eventually give in. He recalls going to Ronnie's house, planning to act sympathetic and gentle, hoping to talk with her, maybe take a walk, and let things unfold naturally. Instead, he found Will sitting outside her house, waiting for her. Marcus watched as Ronnie came outside and argued with Will, clearly showing there was something between them. This realization enraged him, because it meant Ronnie and Will knew each other and might be together, proving Marcus had misjudged the situation. What unsettled him most was Ronnie's reaction afterward. When she noticed Marcus watching her, he expected her either to come talk to him or to act frightened and retreat inside. He liked that he could scare her and saw it as something he could exploit. Instead, Ronnie did neither. She stood on the porch and stared back at him with open defiance, as if challenging him, before calmly going back inside. Marcus is furious at this. No one, especially no girl, had ever done that to him. He resents her confidence and anger, despite finding her physically attractive, and feels deeply insulted. Blaze interrupts his thoughts again, asking if he is sure he doesn't want to go with her. Marcus, realizing he needs to calm himself and knowing exactly what he wants in that moment, softens his tone. He tells Blaze to come sit next to him and asks her to stay a little longer, forcing a smile as he draws her back in. Steve notices Ronnie come back inside and try to act normal, but he can tell something is wrong when she quickly grabs her book and goes to her bedroom. He cannot tell whether she is sad, angry, or scared, but he senses she wants to deal with it alone. Based on his experience teaching teenagers, he knows that it is usually more worrying when children do want to talk, because that means something serious is happening. Jonah, who had been watching cartoons, interrupts Steve with a joke, which makes Steve laugh. They go to the kitchen for Oreos. Jonah tells Steve that he thinks Ronnie and Will had a fight and says he heard Will sounding angry, even though he was supposedly watching cartoons. Steve scolds him for listening in on other people's conversations, but Jonah defends himself and mentions that their mother listens to Ronnie's calls and checks her phone. Steve suggests talking instead of spying, but Jonah dismisses the idea and says Ronnie argues with everyone and drives people crazy. The narration shifts to Steve's childhood. At 12, he had few friends and spent most of his time practicing piano. Music had become an obsession, and he practiced 4 to 6 hours a day, winning many competitions. His parents rarely attended, and instead he often traveled with Pastor Harris, his piano teacher and mentor. During long car rides, they talked often. Pastor Harris was deeply devoted to his calling and lived a busy life serving his congregation, but every evening before dusk, he took an hour-long walk alone on the beach. Steve once asked why, and Pastor Harris explained that he wasn't walking to be alone but to talk with God, treating God as a friend who listens to everything. He said God answers not through sound, but through the heart. After tucking Jonah into bed, Steve checks on Ronnie and finds her already asleep. Her face is calm, and whatever troubled her earlier seems gone. He decides not to wake her and watches both children sleep. He reflects on how long it has been since he last kissed Ronnie goodnight and remembers when she reached an age where such gestures embarrassed her. Unlike Kim, Steve does not resent Ronnie growing up and recalls how, at that age, he made his own decisions. His years as a teacher reinforced his belief that change is inevitable and often beneficial. He remembers conversations with students who confided in him about conflicts with their parents. He usually listened quietly or offered simple, generic observations, Yet students often seemed deeply affected by what he said. Parents sometimes thanked him afterward, even though Steve himself could not recall saying anything particularly insightful. As Jonah's breathing slows, Steve watches Ronnie sleep and feels relieved that the recent tension has faded from her face. Her peaceful expression reminds him of Pastor Harris after his beach walks. He longs again for a sign of God's presence. Knowing Ronnie might leave the next day, he kisses her gently on the cheek, feeling both joy and pain in his love for her. Before dawn, Steve wakes with a sharp longing to play the piano. He regrets boarding it up and fantasizes about playing on someone else's piano. He remembers Pastor Harris mentioning that a new piano will arrive at the church in late July, but that feels far away. Instead, Steve sits at the kitchen table and imagines playing music in his head, recalling Beethoven composing while deaf. He mentally plays the concerto Ronnie performed at Carnegie Hall, moving his fingers as if over keys. As he imagines the music, a single note seems to linger in his mind. He begins to write it down, sketching musical bars and notes. More notes follow, and he records them as well. Though he has composed before and doubts this will amount to anything significant, he feels satisfaction in the act of creation. Even after discarding most of what he wrote and starting over, the effort leaves him feeling fulfilled. At sunrise, Steve decides to walk the beach, hoping to return with the same peaceful expression he once saw on Pastor Harris. As he walks, he focuses on the natural world. The sun rising, birds singing, mist on the water, but he does not feel closer to any answer. He wonders how Pastor Harris could feel God's presence and whether such understanding can even be explained. Steve reflects that these questions are new to him. Only recently, after returning to Wrightsville Beach, has time slowed enough for him to think this way. As he walks, he reconsiders his decision to pursue a career as a concert pianist. He questions why he felt such urgency, why he was willing to leave his family for long periods, and whether the choice was selfish. He begins to suspect that his passion for music may have been a way to fill an inner emptiness rather than a calling alone. As he continues along the beach, he wonders whether recognizing this truth might eventually lead him to the answers he has been seeking. Ronnie wakes feeling rested for the first time since arriving. She hears the television and finds Jonah lying upside down on the couch, eating Pop-Tarts and watching cartoons. When she asks what he is doing, he explains he is watching TV upside down simply because he wants to. She asks about their father, and after some frustrating questioning, Jonah finally explains that Steve was there earlier and then went outside to talk with Pastor Harris. Ronnie remembers that she might be going home today and feels relieved at the thought of leaving behind Blaze, Marcus, Ashley, early mornings, and the beach. She hesitates when she thinks of Will. She admits to herself that she had enjoyed being with him the previous day and regrets not telling him what Ashley had said, but Marcus's presence had scared her. More than anything, she wants to get far away from this place. Looking outside, she sees her father with Pastor Harris and notices Officer Pete Johnson's squad car in the driveway. When Pete leaves, Ronnie immediately senses bad news. She goes outside, greets Pastor Harris politely, and listens as he jokes with her father and reminisces. Pastor Harris mentions the window Steve is making for the church and teases him about childhood mischief before leaving. Once Pastor Harris is gone, Ronnie asks her father about Officer Pete. Steve avoids the question at first, suggesting breakfast, but she insists. He finally tells her that she cannot return to New York yet. The store owner is pressing charges, and Ronnie must stay until she is arraigned the following week. Ronnie goes to sit on the dune, shaken and frightened rather than angry. She knows her father is inside calling her mother and imagines her mother's rage and accusations. Ronnie feels sick thinking about how her mother will react and spread the story, ignoring the fact that Ronnie insists she did not steal anything. She reflects that maybe it is a good thing she cannot go home yet. Steve joins her on the dune and confirms that her mother was angry. He reassures Ronnie that he told her mother the truth and that he believes Ronnie. He apologizes that she cannot go home and acknowledges how much she dislikes it there. Ronnie surprises herself by admitting she does not actually hate it. She just feels like she does not belong. Steve shares that he once felt the same way growing up there and that even after leaving, he missed the ocean. Ronnie asks what will happen next. Steve explains again that the owner is pressing charges because the stolen items were valuable. Ronnie insists she did not do it. Steve reassures her that they will find a good lawyer, even though good lawyers are expensive, and promises to handle it. Steve then asks about Blaze. Ronnie explains that Blaze has a frightening boyfriend and believes Ronnie was trying to steal him. She admits she saw Marcus the night before, watching her while she talked to Will. Steve advises her to stay away from Blaze and Marcus, and Ronnie agrees. She adds that Officer Pete was kind and seemed to believe her, which Steve confirms. Ronnie asks her father why he left the family. Steve explains that after leaving Juilliard, he chased his dream of being a concert pianist without fully understanding how hard it would be on Ronnie's mother. They drifted apart. Ronnie asks directly if there was someone else. Steve does not deny it and admits he should have tried harder to save the marriage. He tells her that despite everything, his children are the best things that ever happened to him. Feeling overwhelmed, Ronnie asks what she should do now. Steve suggests that her first step should be to talk to Will. He says he does not know Will well, but he knows Ronnie was happy with him, and he saw that Will was happy too. Ronnie later stands outside Blakely Breaks, nervous about seeing Will but knowing she owes him an explanation. She reflects on what she likes about him, that he is confident, not afraid of her, and clear about who he is. She goes inside where Will and Scott are working. Will approaches her without smiling and asks what she wants. Ronnie explains that Ashley told her she was just Will's latest project, and that everything they did together was something he did with every girl. Will immediately says Ashley lied. Ronnie apologizes for overreacting and admits she had a good time with him. Will criticizes her for shutting him out, then steps forward and kisses her. The kiss is brief and gentle but exactly what Ronnie wanted. Will tells her not to shut him out again and says he had a great time too. Ronnie leaves feeling lightheaded and happy, replaying the kiss in her mind. She is certain they will see each other again. Back near the house, Jonah questions her in a roundabout way about cookies, using the example to complain that their father will not let him have one without eating a sandwich first. Ronnie finds the conversation amusing and considers taking him out for ice cream later. She goes into the workshop to see the stained glass window her father is making. She tells Steve that she talked to Will and that he likes her. Steve approves. Ronnie asks why he is making the window, and Steve tells her the story of how Pastor Harris once sheltered him as a child, fed him, and let him play the piano, inspiring his lifelong love of music. He explains that after the church burned down and Pastor Harris nearly died, insurance would not cover a new window, and Steve feels compelled to finish it himself. Ronnie tells him he is doing a good thing. They talk briefly about Jonah and cookies. Then Steve asks if she wants to have lunch together. She agrees. As they leave, Steve asks casually if he will get to meet the boy who likes his daughter. Ronnie answers probably, and Steve suggests inviting Will over for dinner. Ronnie is unsure but agrees to decide later. Will and Scott stand in the sand after finishing a late afternoon volleyball scrimmage. Scott criticizes Will for losing focus during games, insisting that if Will stayed mentally sharp, they could dominate stronger teams like Landry and Tyson in the upcoming tournament. Will points out that they just won decisively, but Scott argues they should have shut the opponents out completely to intimidate them psychologically. Scott shifts from volleyball to Ronnie, mocking her with nicknames and accusing Will of being distracted by her. Will stops him and tells him to stop calling her names. Scott insists the issue is Will's lack of focus and warns him against getting serious with a girl, claiming it will ruin his training, friendships, and tournament preparation. Will says little, which only increases Scott's anxiety. Scott openly admits he wanted Will to go back to Ashley so that Will wouldn't get serious again. He fears Will withdraw from everything else if he commits to Ronnie. While Scott continues talking, he notices Ronnie approaching down the beach. Will turns, sees her, and immediately smiles. He goes toward her, but she stops him and tells him not to kiss her and to just listen. Later, Ronnie sits beside Will in his truck as they drive. She tells him her father won't care that he's dressed casually for dinner, but Will insists on changing because he wants to make a good impression. Their conversation turns playful and teasing, including jokes about her purple hair, which briefly irritates her until Will reassures her that he likes it because it's part of who she is. Ronnie rummages through the glove compartment, teasing Will and finding a bullet, which leads to joking about hunting. She then notices a photograph of a blonde woman and comments on her looks, only to learn it's Will's sister. She also asks about the matching bracelets he and his sister wear, and Will avoids explaining further, which Ronnie senses and respects. As they continue driving, Ronnie comments on how far they seem to be going and continues teasing Will about his conversation and the earlier kiss in the garage, which she says wasn't romantic. Will disagrees, calling it romantic despite the setting. He then pulls up to wrought iron gates that open as he presses a remote, and they drive inside. Will is focused on the idea of having dinner with Ronnie's family, while Ronnie grows quiet as they enter. Ronnie is immediately overwhelmed when Will drives her through wrought iron gates onto an enormous estate. The manicured gardens, marble statues, exotic cars being hand-waxed, and the massive Georgian mansion make her feel completely out of place, especially in her torn jeans and t-shirt. She realizes, after seeing a plaque reading the Blakeleys, that Will's family isn't just well off. His father likely founded the Blakely Brakes automotive chain. The realization makes her feel small and unprepared, and she's irritated that Will never warned her. Inside the house, the scale and luxury continue to unsettle her. The grand staircase, library, music room, open living spaces, and a yacht docked behind the house. Will casually introduces her to his mother, Susan, whose cool, controlled politeness makes it clear she doesn't welcome the surprise guest. Susan's thin smiles and pointed remarks, especially about Ronnie being a vegetarian, only heighten Ronnie's discomfort. Will, meanwhile, seems oblivious to the tension, chatting easily and announcing that he'll be having dinner with Ronnie's family. When Will goes upstairs to shower, Ronnie is left alone with Susan, an awkward and strained moment where both women clearly feel unhappy being together. The tension is broken when Will's father, Tom, joins them. Unlike Susan, Tom is warm, friendly, and immediately puts Ronnie at ease. He jokes with her, treats her naturally, and seems genuinely pleased to meet her, even teasing Will about his eating habits and praising the fact that Ronnie's vegetarianism might finally make his son eat healthier. Tom invites Ronnie outside to see something, despite Susan's dismissive comment. Ronnie expects a private jet, but instead finds Tom flying a remote-control airplane near the water. His self-deprecating humor and enthusiasm charm her, and she laughs easily with him. Will later joins them, freshly showered, while Tom continues embarrassing him by recounting how painfully shy Will was as a boy. Ronnie doesn't mind at all, and Tom clearly enjoys pointing out that she isn't bothered, much to Will's embarrassment. After a brief discussion about business issues at the garage, Will and Ronnie leave for her house. In the truck, Will apologizes for his parents, especially his father's teasing. Ronnie reassures him that she likes Tom, though she hints that Susan intimidated her. Ronnie then warns Will that her family has a weird tradition, setting the stage for what comes next. At Ronnie's house, the dinner goes far better than she ever expected. Her father serves spaghetti, Will politely eats everything, and the atmosphere is relaxed and respectful. Her dad treats Will kindly without prying or embarrassing Ronnie, and Jonah is unusually well-behaved. After dinner, the four of them play liar's poker at the kitchen table, laughing, arguing playfully, and stacking coins. Jonah ends up winning repeatedly and loudly declares everyone else liars. As Ronnie watches the scene, she realizes how well the evening has gone. Will fits easily into her family in a way she hadn't anticipated. Her father doesn't boast about his past or Ronnie's accomplishments, doesn't interfere, and trusts her judgment. The ease of the night makes Ronnie reflect with some regret on how distant she's been from her dad for years, and how much she might have missed by pushing him away. She also contrasts the experience with meeting Will's mother earlier, recognizing how intimidated Susan made her feel and how much that bothered her. It's the first time in a long while Ronnie has felt as if she didn't measure up, and the feeling lingers even as the night stays warm and enjoyable. As the game winds down and darkness falls, Ronnie senses Will watching her. They exchange smiles, both nearly out of change. When Will asks if she'd like to go for a walk, Ronnie knows he's asking because he wants to be alone with her. Not casually, but because he cares. Meeting his gaze honestly, she says she'd love to go for a walk, fully aware that something real is beginning between them. Will and Ronnie walk barefoot along the shoreline at night, the beach stretching for miles and nearly deserted. Will reflects on how the area has changed since his childhood, becoming more crowded and developed, yet he still loves the ocean at night. As a boy, he often biked to the beach and witnessed memorable sights. Sharks washed ashore, elaborate sand castles, and even a whale close to the surf. Tonight's quiet amplifies his sense of connection, and as they walk together through the surf, he realizes that Ronnie is the kind of person he could imagine facing the future with. He knows he is young and not thinking in terms of marriage, but he feels that if he met Ronnie years later, she might still be the one. This sets him apart from Scott and many others his age, who focus on the immediate present. Will reflects that he has never been interested in casual relationships or short-term charm. When he meets someone, he thinks about long-term compatibility rather than brief excitement. He attributes much of this outlook to his parents' marriage. They have been together for 30 years, building a family and a business while supporting one another through both success and tragedy. Watching them function as a team shaped his understanding of commitment and partnership. Will thinks back to his relationship with Ashley. While her beauty mattered, it wasn't the main reason he stayed with her for 2 years. Initially, he believed they could confide in each other, but over time he grew disappointed, especially after she admitted to kissing another boy at a party. Though it was only a kiss, it prompted him to reevaluate what he wanted in close relationships. He began noticing aspects of her character he disliked, her gossiping and self-centered habits, and eventually ended the relationship, believing it was better to stop before it grew more complicated. His sister Megan comes to mind as well. She shares his seriousness about relationships and believes that short-term relationships are pointless if they can't survive long-term. Megan's standards have frustrated their mother, but Will admires her clarity and independence, especially since she eventually found someone who met her expectations. Ronnie reminds him of Megan in many ways. Independent, unconventional, and thoughtful. She stands out because of her actions, protecting turtle nests, helping a lost child, reading serious literature, and because she showed interest in Will without knowing anything about his family's wealth or status. That matters deeply to him. He is proud of his family and the business his father built, but he wants to be known simply as Will, not as an extension of the Blakely name. Over time, he has grown cautious in relationships for this reason, and Ronnie's reaction to his house confirmed that she truly hadn't known. Ronnie notices his silence and asks what he's thinking. He tells her he enjoyed visiting her home and spending time with her family. She acknowledges that her house is very different from his, and they joke about Jonah's talent for winning liar's poker. Their conversation turns to Will's family background, and Ronnie makes it clear that his wealth doesn't affect her feelings. She explains that she has dealt with similar issues in New York, where people are obsessed with status and family names, and emphasizes that she is with Will because of who he is, not who his family is. Will assures her he never doubted her intentions. He then shifts the conversation toward the workshop near her house, where her father and Jonah are making a stained glass window. She explains that her father used to teach piano and that working on the window is something new for him. When Ronnie asks about Will's future, he tells her he will work at the garage until August and then attend Vanderbilt. Though it's a prestigious school, his lack of enthusiasm becomes evident. He admits he wanted to attend a different university with a strong environmental science program, but Vanderbilt was important to his mother due to family tradition and her involvement with the school. He explains that his mother has become controlling since a tragic accident involving his younger brother, Mike. Will shares the story of the accident in detail. Years earlier, he, Scott, and Mike were riding in the car with his mother when Will and Scott were roughhousing in the back seat. Their distraction caused his mother to lose control of the car on a slick road. The car went through a guardrail into the water. Scott managed to save Will and their mother, but Mike died instantly. Will explains how deeply this affected his family, particularly his mother, who blamed herself and partially blamed Will. Since then, she has tried to control everything to prevent further loss. He explains the meaning of the bracelet he wears, IMTF, which stands for In My Thoughts Forever, created in memory of Mike. Will describes the trauma of the funeral and the lasting impact of that day on his family. Ronnie listens quietly and offers comfort, telling him she's glad he shared the story. They continue walking, holding hands. Will asks Ronnie to share something about herself. She explains that she hadn't spoken to her father for 3 years after her parents separated and only recently reconnected with him. She admits she never wanted to come to the beach for the summer and had been angry with him for a long time. When Will asks if she's glad she came now, she answers hesitantly. They talk about their childhoods, piano playing, and Ronnie's refusal to play music anymore, though she doesn't explain why. Will senses there is more to the story but respects her silence. Instead, they talk about her life in New York and her friends. The conversation feels effortless and intimate, and Will realizes he has shared more with Ronnie than he ever did with Ashley. As they walk alone under the stars, holding hands, the moment feels significant and quiet. A shooting star passes overhead, and Ronnie asks what he wished for. Instead of answering, Will pulls her close, wraps his arm around her, and kisses her. In that moment, he knows he is falling in love with her. Ronnie finds herself enjoying the luxury of Will's home more than she expected. Lying on the diving board beside the pool with sweet tea, fruit served by a chef, and all the small details of wealth that surround her. Even so, she wonders what it must have been like for Will to grow up in such an environment and assumes that, because it was normal to him, he likely no longer notices it. She watches him climb onto the cabana roof and prepare to jump, noticing his physical strength and ease of movement. They banter back and forth as he announces he's going to do a flip. Ronnie teases him, challenging him to do more than one and mocking his effort. He responds playfully, and after some negotiation, he performs 2 flips followed by a clean dive. Ronnie pretends to be unimpressed, rating his dive poorly just to irritate him. Their joking escalates when Will pulls on the diving board and eventually drags her into the pool against her will. She laughs and resists playfully, refusing to forgive him immediately. While they are in the water together, Ronnie notices Susan watching them from the veranda, clearly displeased. Later, on their way to check on the turtle nest, they stop for ice cream. Ronnie reflects on how quickly everything has developed between them, amazed that they had kissed for the first time only the night before. The day has felt even better than the previous one, and she enjoys how naturally they move between seriousness and teasing. Wanting to get even for being thrown into the pool, she deliberately smears ice cream on Will's face and runs off laughing, only to collide with Marcus. Marcus grabs her, joined by Blaze, Teddy, and Lance. Ronnie panics and demands to be released. Will immediately steps in, ordering Marcus to let her go. Marcus mocks him, calls him Richie Rich, and makes a comment about Scott and bottle rockets. The remark visibly unsettles Will. Marcus tightens his grip on Ronnie before finally letting her go. Blaze lights a fireball casually, and Marcus taunts Ronnie about her upcoming court date, implying that bruises wouldn't help her case and calling her a thief. He and Blaze walk away, tossing the fireball back and forth. Later, Ronnie sits with Will on the dune outside her house and tells him everything. Her arrest in New York, the planted CDs, the situation at the music store, and the truth about her past shoplifting. She admits she stole once before because her friends were doing it, confessed, and never did it again. She explains that unless the charges are dropped or Blaze tells the truth, she could face serious trouble both here and back in New York. She insists she's not lying. Will tells her he believes her. He explains that Marcus has always been dangerous, sharing stories from Marcus's childhood, including cruel behavior that everyone suspected but could never prove. He says Blaze, whom he calls Galadriel, used to be kind, but something changed after her parents' divorce, and he no longer understands her loyalty to Marcus. Ronnie says she has to go to court next week, and Will offers to come with her, but she refuses, worried about his mother finding out and already sensing Susan's dislike. They talk about Marcus's fixation on Scott. Ronnie recalls the incident at the festival when Marcus threw fries at Scott and asked about bottle rockets, and she points out how Will froze when Marcus repeated the comment earlier. Will brushes it off, insisting it's nothing and reassuring her that he wouldn't let anything happen to her. Will then asks about the piano behind the plywood wall in her house. Ronnie explains that she asked her father to block it off because she didn't want to see it anymore. When Will suggests her hatred of the piano must come from loving it deeply, she finally explains. Her father taught her piano from the time she could walk. They practiced constantly, played together, and even composed music. It was their bond. When he left the family, she felt personally betrayed and vowed never to play or write music again. Seeing him play the piano after she arrived felt like he was pretending the past didn't matter, and she couldn't accept that. She admits they've been getting along better recently, but that doesn't mean she wants to play again. Will tells her she's only hurting herself and calls her talent a gift, suggesting she could attend Juilliard. Ronnie snaps, revealing that Juilliard still writes to her and would take her back any time, then accuses Will of caring only because of her talent and questions whether that makes her good enough for him. Will immediately reassures her that nothing has changed. She is exactly who he thought she was from the beginning, and there's no way she could ever fit him better than she already does. Hearing the sincerity in his voice, Ronnie feels ashamed of her outburst. Despite having known each other only a few days, she realizes he is kind, perceptive, and that he loves her. Sensing her shift, Will moves closer and kisses her gently. In that moment, Ronnie knows she wants nothing more than to stay wrapped in his arms, holding on to the closeness they share. Marcus watches Ronnie and Will from a distance and decides he doesn't care anymore. He tells himself to forget her and focus on partying. Teddy and Lance have already picked up alcohol, and people are starting to arrive. Earlier, Marcus noticed a vacationing family leaving a nearby rental house close to Ronnie's place. From experience, he knows the house will be empty until the next day, after the cleaners come, which makes it perfect for a party. Getting inside won't be difficult because Marcus has both the key and the security code. He knows that vacationers rarely lock doors when they leave for the beach and usually bring little of value. Owners often leave security codes posted near the alarm panel to avoid late-night calls from security companies when renters accidentally set off alarms. Marcus considers this careless and easy to exploit. He prides himself on knowing how to use these opportunities without overdoing it. Teddy and Lance always want to party in rental houses, but Marcus limits it to once a summer so management companies don't get suspicious, increase police patrols, or warn owners. Too much attention would ruin things and force them back to hanging out at Bowers Point. He briefly considers burning the house afterward, reasoning that a fire would erase all evidence of a party. He thinks about how much he loves fire, remembering the first barn he burned when he was 12 and how incredible it felt to watch it burn for hours. He recalls setting other fires over the years, including one at an abandoned warehouse, and how nothing makes him feel more powerful than holding a lighter. Still, he dismisses the idea for tonight. He doesn't want Teddy or Lance to know about his past, and the party itself is enough. Ronnie's father dies quietly in his sleep less than a week later, with Ronnie lying on the floor beside him. She cannot bring herself to describe his final moments to anyone, not even her mother. Watching him take his last breaths feels too private, something meant only for the two of them. She understands it as a final gift her father gave her, one she will carry forever. Instead of describing his death, Ronnie talks to her mother about the last time she played piano for him. She tells her that she played as long and as beautifully as she could, knowing how much it meant to him, though he was so weak at the end that she is unsure whether he could still hear her. Her mother holds her and assures her that he did hear, and that it was beautiful. Ronnie rests against her mother like she did as a child and reflects that her father made her happy too, that she learned so much from him, and that she wishes she had told him more before it was too late. Her mother reassures her that he already knew. The funeral is small and simple, held in the church that has recently reopened. Her father's wish to be cremated is honored. Pastor Harris delivers the eulogy, short but full of grief and love, and Ronnie cries alongside Jonah, holding him as he sobs. Only a few people attend: Galadriel, Officer Pete, and a handful of others. Ronnie feels a deep ache that so few people knew how special her father was. After the service, Ronnie remains seated in the pew with Jonah while her mother and Brian step outside. She does not want to leave. The rain that had fallen all morning stops, and the sky begins to clear as she looks toward the stained glass window her father created. Sunlight suddenly pours through the glass, scattering into brilliant, jewel-like colors that flood the church and the piano beneath it. For a moment, she imagines her father sitting at the piano, bathed in light. She squeezes Jonah's hand, knowing he is seeing it too, and whispers a greeting to her father, certain he has come as he promised. When the light fades, she prepares to leave but notices Tom and Susan Blakely seated in the last pew. She asks Jonah to go outside and tell their mother she will be a moment longer. Susan expresses condolences, and Ronnie thanks them for coming and for what they did for the church, acknowledging that the donation was meant to be anonymous. Tom admits it was, and Ronnie explains she guessed after seeing him at the site. He glances toward the window, having seen the light as well. Outside the church, Ronnie sees Will. She had not expected him to come and is overwhelmed by his presence. He is dressed in black, looks older, and seems uncertain. They exchange simple words. He tells her he is sorry about her father and says he will miss him. Ronnie struggles with the weight of everything that has happened since the summer and wonders whether she is still the person Will once loved. They talk awkwardly about school and plans. Will tells her Vanderbilt is harder than he expected and that his parents are taking him to Europe for Christmas. Ronnie tells him she plans to audition for Juilliard. He smiles, genuinely happy for her. The distance between them feels wrong given what they once shared. Ronnie apologizes for the things she said to him when they parted, admitting she did not mean them. Will reassures her that he understands. When she begins to cry, he pulls her into his arms and comforts her, telling her he was never as angry as she believed. He explains that he did not call often because he knew her father needed her, and he did not want to take time away from that. In his embrace, Ronnie feels both comfort and sorrow. She realizes how much she still needs him. He notices she is still wearing the bracelet he gave her, and she confirms that she has kept it with her always. Will tells her he will call her after he returns from Europe. Ronnie agrees, even though she knows it is not enough and that their lives are now moving in separate directions. They part with the quiet understanding that the summer they shared has ended, and that both of them must move forward, carrying what they had as something finished but unforgettable. Epilogue. In the weeks after her father's funeral, Ronnie experiences ongoing emotional upheaval. Some mornings she wakes with dread and spends hours replaying the final months she spent caring for him, overwhelmed by grief and regret and unable even to cry. After such an intense period together, she struggles to accept that he is suddenly gone and unreachable. His absence feels sharp and constant, often leaving her bitter. Over time, however, these mornings become less frequent. Ronnie realizes that caring for her father changed her. She knows she will survive because that is what he would have wanted. She imagines him reminding her that she is stronger than she thinks and that he would want her to live fully, just as he did during the last year of his life. She also turns her attention to Jonah, knowing her father would want her to help her brother heal. Jonah is released for Christmas break less than a week after they return to New York, and Ronnie spends much of that time with him. She takes him ice skating at Rockefeller Center, to the top of the Empire State Building, to the dinosaur exhibits at the Museum of Natural History, and to FAO Schwartz. Though she once considered such activities cliché, both Jonah and Ronnie enjoy them. They also spend quiet time together, watching cartoons, drawing, and even sleeping on the floor of Jonah's room one night at his request. They reminisce about the summer and share stories about their father, which comforts them both. Ronnie notices that Jonah is still struggling. One cold, windy night during a walk, he asks if their mother is sick like their father was, explaining that Ronnie and their mother no longer fight, just as Ronnie had stopped fighting with their father before he died. Ronnie kneels to reassure him, explaining that their mother is not sick and that they simply chose to stop fighting. Jonah asks her to promise, and she holds him and does. Returning to New York also changes how Ronnie feels about the city. She struggles with the noise, crowds, and constant movement. She feels little desire to socialize and turns down an invitation from Kayla, sensing that their friendship will never be the same. Ronnie is content with that, spending most of her time with Jonah and practicing piano. Because her father's piano has not yet arrived, Ronnie practices at Juilliard. She contacts the director, a friend of her father's, who apologizes for missing the funeral and is pleased to hear from her. When Ronnie tells him she is reconsidering applying to Juilliard, he arranges an accelerated audition schedule and helps expedite her application. Only 3 weeks after returning to New York, Ronnie auditions, opening with the song she composed with her father. Though she feels rusty, she believes her father would have been proud. Since then, she practices several hours a day and begins experimenting with new compositions. While practicing, she often thinks of her father, especially when sunlight cuts through the buildings and reminds her of the stained glass window and the light at the funeral. Ronnie continues to think about Will constantly. She focuses more on memories of their summer than on their brief encounter at the funeral. She hears nothing from him after the service, and as Christmas passes, she begins to lose hope that he will call. She tells herself it may be better that way, since she is unsure what they could even say to each other now. She forces herself to focus on her work and the future, reminding herself that music is her path regardless of whether she is admitted to Juilliard. One day, while practicing, her phone vibrates. Expecting it to be her mother, Ronnie instead sees Will's name. She answers and he tells her it is Will. He sounds as though he is in a large, echoing space. He explains he has been back from Europe for a few days and asks about Jonah. Ronnie tells him Jonah is slowly improving. She mentions that she auditioned at Juilliard, and Will indicates he already knows. Confused, Ronnie explains she is only practicing there because of her father's connection. Will then asks if she is free to go out that weekend. Realizing what he is implying, Ronnie asks if he is coming to New York. Will tells her he is staying with Megan and casually reveals that he landed over an hour ago. Before Ronnie can fully process this, she hears Will's voice behind her. She turns and sees him standing in the doorway, holding his phone. He admits he wanted to surprise her. He tells her there is something important he needs to say, but first asks if they have a date that weekend. She agrees, and he asks about the following weekend as well. Ronnie asks how long he is staying. Will explains that he is transferring schools. He reminds her that Vanderbilt was not his first choice and that he had wanted to attend a university with a strong environmental science program. Through connections his mother has, he was accepted and will begin next semester. He reveals that the school is Columbia University in New York. Ronnie is stunned. Will explains he will start in a few weeks and hopes she will help him adjust to the city. As he pulls her close, Ronnie realizes that Will be living in New York, near her. She wraps her arms around him, overwhelmed by the moment. They joke lightly about the lack of fishing, mudding, and beach volleyball in the city. Will says he will make sacrifices. They kiss gently, and when Ronnie looks at him, she sees both the boy she loved in the summer and the man she loves now. Will tells her that he never stopped loving her and never stopped thinking about her, even though summers come to an end. Ronnie tells him she loves him too, and they kiss again, united in the present moment. Marcus imagines how the night will go. Alcohol, drugs, loud music, and girls, especially drunk girls. He plans to sleep with Blaze first and possibly with others afterward if Blaze drinks enough to pass out. He even considers hooking up with another girl while Blaze is sober, knowing it would upset her. He knows Blaze would cause a scene, but he also knows she would come back afterward, crying and begging just like she always does. To him, she is predictable and irritating, always whining. He compares Blaze unfavorably to Ronnie, the girl down the beach, whom he describes physically and fixates on. He tells himself he's trying not to think about Ronnie. He rationalizes that she doesn't like him, prefers Will, and probably wouldn't have slept with him anyway. He insults her in his thoughts, calling her cold and teasing. Despite this, he can't understand what went wrong or how she seemed to see through him so easily. Marcus insists to himself that he's better off without her and doesn't need anyone. Yet he questions why he keeps watching her and why it bothers him that she's with Will. That irritation turns into interest when he remembers that he knows Will's weakness. The thought amuses him. He decides he can have fun with that, just like he plans to have fun tonight. Will feels the summer slipping away too fast. Between working at the garage and spending nearly all his free time with Ronnie, the days blur together, and as August approaches, he grows anxious about what's coming. Ronnie returning to New York and himself leaving for Vanderbilt. Ronnie has become central to his life, and although he doesn't always understand her, Their differences seem to strengthen what they share. They argue about his wanting to go with her to court. She refuses, but he still shows up unexpectedly with flowers. The charges aren't dropped, and her next court date is set for August 28th, after he'll already be gone. But she accepts the flowers and kisses him, and he feels he did the right thing by being there. Ronnie surprises him again by getting a part-time job at the aquarium without telling him or asking for help. She explains she needs something to do while he works and wants to pay for her lawyer herself, since her dad doesn't have much money. Her first day leaves her sickened from feeding otters buckets of dead fish, something she complains about to Will. They spend hours talking, sometimes about trivial things like movies or vegetarian food, other times about deeper issues. Ronnie opens up more about the piano and her strained relationship with her dad, while Will admits his resentment about living up to his mother's expectations. They talk about Jonah and Megan and imagine their futures. Will's path seems planned out: college, work experience, then taking over the family business. But even as he says it, he hears his mother's voice behind it and wonders if it's really what he wants. Ronnie, by contrast, has no clear plan and isn't afraid of that uncertainty. Will realizes she is more in control of her own life than he is. When raccoons destroy several turtle nests, Ronnie insists they take turns guarding the nest behind her house. Instead of alternating, they spend most nights together there, talking, kissing, and holding each other until late. Scott doesn't understand Will's priorities and grows irritated when Will is late to practice. At work, Scott pretends either that Ronnie doesn't matter or that Will come to his senses. Will doesn't share much about Ronnie with him. Will's mother shows her disapproval subtly. She forces smiles, stays formal with Ronnie, never asks about her, and makes comments about long-distance relationships or spending too much time together. Will hates this and starts avoiding home, frustrated both with his mother's attitude and with himself for not confronting her. Marcus remains a shadow over their summer. When they encounter him, he provokes Will, often mentioning Scott. Will feels trapped. Reacting could bring police attention. Doing nothing fills him with shame, especially since Ronnie has faced court honestly. Scott refuses to consider going to the police, reminding Will indirectly of how he saved the family after Mikey's death. Will begins to question whether one heroic act excuses later wrongdoing and whether he can live with the cost of Scott's friendship. In early August, Will takes Ronnie crab hunting at night. She's terrified of spider crabs and clings to him, complaining non-stop, while he teases her. Their banter continues easily, mixing humor and affection. They talk about Scott, the upcoming tournament, and his sister's wedding. Ronnie worries about Will's mother but agrees to attend the wedding if Will commits to tournament preparation. He also asks her to try again to convince Blaze to tell the truth, though Ronnie doubts it will work. They stop by the workshop where Ronnie's father is making a stained glass window for a rebuilt church. Seeing it unsettles Will, making him think about Scott and the fire. Ronnie explains why the project matters to her dad. Will asks what it means to be a friend and how far one should go to protect one. Ronnie answers that it depends on what was done and insists that doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard. She explains how admitting her own guilt mattered to her, how wrongdoing made her feel dark inside, and that she doesn't believe Will is the kind of person who can live with that. Will wants to tell her everything but can't. He knows she understands him deeply and that he could be better with her. They leave the shed together, and their kissing grows intense until Ronnie stops him, reminding him her dad might see them. They joke, pull back, and calm themselves. She goes to check on her dad, teasing him as she leaves, and Will reflects again on how much she means to him and how hard it will be to let this summer end. Ronnie watches Will leave and heads back toward the house, thinking about what he said regarding Blaze and feeling the weight of her upcoming court date. Throughout the summer, the uncertainty of what might happen has unsettled her more than the punishment itself. She worries about how the charges could affect her future. College applications, jobs, teaching, unsure whether this mistake will follow her forever. Her lawyer offers no guarantees, which only deepens her anxiety. At night, she often wakes up and can't fall back asleep. She also thinks about Will's sister's wedding. Will assumes her attending wouldn't be a big deal, but Ronnie knows Susan doesn't want her there and fears becoming a distraction on Megan's day. As she reaches the back porch, she's startled by the rocking chair and realizes Jonah has been watching her. He bluntly calls what he saw between her and Will gross, and admits he was watching them near the workshop. Ronnie insists Will wasn't squishing her, but Jonah stands by his interpretation. When she asks where Will went, Jonah says he went home to work the next day. Jonah then explains that he and their dad will watch the turtle nest that night instead of Ronnie. Jonah is excited and has already packed supplies, including food and a tennis racket to fend off raccoons. Ronnie humors him. She compliments the stained glass window in the workshop, and Jonah explains how seriously their dad takes it, making him redo pieces until they're perfect. He mentions how hot it gets when the kiln is running. They joke about cookies and naps, and Ronnie is surprised to learn that their dad now naps every afternoon. When she asks where he is, Jonah explains that he's at the church and that Pastor Harris has been visiting often. Jonah suspects his dad went there to play the piano, which surprises Ronnie. Jonah hesitates, worried Ronnie might yell at their dad again, recalling the last time she did when he was playing the piano. Ronnie promises she won't yell. She offers to make Jonah dinner, boiling hot dogs just the way he likes. They joke about her aquarium job and dead fish, and Jonah asks if he can watch her feed the otters sometime. She says she might even be able to let him help. Jonah then jokingly blackmails her for money in exchange for not telling their dad about what he saw with Will, eventually settling for $1. After dinner, Ronnie walks toward the church. It's small and weathered compared to the surrounding houses, still under construction, with visible signs of stalled work. She enters through the open door and sees her father sitting at a new piano in the unfinished sanctuary, lit by a single lamp. He's playing something unfamiliar, modern, and unfinished. She watches silently as he stops, starts over, and alters the melody, clearly absorbed and content. Ronnie realizes she can still hear flaws and imagine improvements, just as she could when she was younger, and feels pride and guilt. She begins to wonder if her father played not to push her, but because music is essential to who he is, and she recognizes how much he's given up because of her demand that the piano be hidden. Her father begins coughing heavily, and Ronnie rushes to him, alarmed. He assures her it's just dust irritation, something that happens often. She notices he looks pale but accepts his explanation. They talk about the piece he was playing, which he admits he's been struggling to compose. He says she was always better at composing than he was, and that something feels off in the music, like he's doing it backwards. Ronnie insists it was good and notices it sounds more modern. He admits he doesn't know what's happening to him musically. They talk about the church's stalled reconstruction and the stained glass window, which he's determined to finish and install himself, even though he doesn't yet know how. Ronnie asks why the piano is there if the church isn't finished, and he explains it was delivered early and there's nowhere else to store it. When he realizes the time, he says he needs to get back to Jonah to camp out and eat. Ronnie tells him she's already handled dinner. As they leave the church, she notices again how tired and frail he looks. Steve reflects that Ronnie was right about the song sounding modern. He remembers that it hadn't begun that way. At first, he tried to imitate composers like Schumann, then Grieg, then Saint-Saëns, but nothing felt right. None of those attempts captured the feeling he'd had when he first scribbled down the simple notes. Unlike earlier in his life, when he tried to create music he imagined would last for generations, this time he experimented instead. He stopped trying to echo great composers and began trusting himself, even though the piece was still unfinished and might never be right. For the first time, that uncertainty felt acceptable. He wonders if this has always been his problem, that he spent his life copying what worked for others. He played music written long ago and searched for God on the beach because it worked for Pastor Harris. Sitting now on a dune with Jonah beside him, watching his son peer through binoculars, he considers whether he followed others not because they had answers, but because he was afraid to trust his own instincts. He realizes his teachers may have become a crutch and that he'd been afraid to truly be himself. Jonah asks if Steve will come visit them in New York, and Steve says nothing would make him happier. Jonah says Ronnie will talk to him now. Steve agrees they've all changed a lot over the summer. Jonah says he thinks he's gotten taller, and Steve agrees, adding that Jonah has learned how to make a stained glass window. Jonah then says he wants to learn to stand on his head because he likes being upside down and asks Steve to hold his legs while he learns. Steve agrees. They sit quietly together on the dune under the stars. Steve feels content spending the summer with his kids, talking about nothing important, and dreads that these days will soon end. Jonah says it's boring because he can't see anything, but Steve says it's peaceful and points out the stars and waves. Jonah says the waves sound the same every day. Steve asks when Jonah wants to practice standing on his head, and Jonah says maybe tomorrow. Steve notices Jonah sounds sad and asks what's wrong. Jonah asks if he can go to school there and live with Steve. Steve asks about Jonah's mom. Jonah says he loves and misses her but likes being there with Steve and doesn't want the summer to end. Steve tells him that even if Jonah stayed, school would mean they wouldn't spend time together the same way. Jonah suggests homeschooling, sounding scared and very young. Steve says Jonah's mom would miss him too much and tells him she loves him and needs him, but that he loves Jonah as well. Jonah accepts this and asks if they're still going to Fort Fisher the next day. Steve says yes and suggests water slides afterward, then Chuck E. Cheese's. Jonah becomes more animated. Jonah eats cookies quietly and asks if the turtles will hatch that night. Steve says not yet, but soon. Jonah falls silent, thinking about leaving again, and Steve pulls him closer, feeling something inside himself break. Early the next morning, Steve walks on the beach and realizes he isn't searching for God anymore. God isn't there for him in that way, and he understands that if God were easy to find, the beaches would be crowded with seekers. He realizes that searching for God is itself a mystery. Steve spends the day with Jonah as planned. He enjoys Fort Fisher more than Jonah because of his understanding of history, while Jonah enjoys the water slides far more than Steve, who ends up carrying the mat and feels exhausted. They go to Chuck E. Cheese's, play games, win tickets, and leave with small prizes. It's a good but tiring day filled with laughter. After spending some time with Ronnie, Steve goes to bed and falls asleep quickly, completely exhausted. Ronnie goes to look for Blaze after her father and Jonah leave for the day, hoping to talk to her before Blaze goes to work at the aquarium. Ronnie tells herself she has nothing to lose. She finds Blaze sitting on a dune near the pier, watching surfers. Blaze initially says nothing and makes a comment about Ronnie's aquarium uniform, calling her an Easter egg. Ronnie explains she never tried to take Marcus from Blaze and insists she would never hurt her that way. Blaze admits she knows Ronnie is telling the truth, but says she planted the items in Ronnie's bag because she was angry and jealous, since Marcus liked Ronnie. Blaze explains her own situation. Her mother is remarrying, they fought, and Blaze was kicked out of the house and locked out. She has nowhere else to go and depends on Marcus for food, shelter, and money from their performances. Marcus controls her, sometimes refusing to let her shower or eat when he's angry. Blaze says she hates how he treats her but feels trapped. Ronnie suggests Blaze talk to her mother, but Blaze insists her mother hates her and believes tough love is the answer. Ronnie tells Blaze what she did was wrong but says she can still fix it. Blaze says Marcus won't allow it and warns Ronnie that Marcus is still talking about her and that she should stay away. Before leaving, Ronnie tells Blaze she can come to her if she needs food or a place to stay and calls Blaze's fire obsession with Marcus crazy. Blaze responds sadly, asking whether it's really crazier than the rest of her life. Later, Ronnie stands in front of her closet, anxious about Will's sister's wedding. It's a black tie event, and she has nothing appropriate to wear and no money to buy anything. She debates whether to go at all, knowing Susan doesn't like her and that she'll likely feel out of place. Jonah enters and asks why she's standing there. When Ronnie says she has nothing to wear and no money, Jonah reveals he has been saving cash in a toy airplane. He explains he earned it by keeping secrets and playing cards. He offers Ronnie the money on the condition that he doesn't have to go dress shopping with her. Ronnie agrees. On the morning of the wedding, Ronnie barely recognizes herself after buying a gown, styling her hair, and doing her makeup. Her dress is black with sequins, and she feels nervous but admits she looks good. Her father and Jonah react with surprise and admiration, reassuring her that she looks beautiful. Her father drives her to the Blakely estate, which looks like a movie set with flowers, tents, lights, and heavy security. Ronnie feels out of place among the tuxedos and gowns but steels herself. Will greets her at the door in a tuxedo and is visibly stunned by how she looks. He tells her she looks incredible. They spend some time together before the ceremony, walking the grounds. Ronnie observes the elaborate setup, the flowers, the ice sculptures, and the massive tent. During the ceremony, she watches Megan walk down the aisle and decides she is the most beautiful bride she has ever seen. The ceremony is elegant but warm, with personal vows and light-hearted moments. Ronnie realizes she likes Megan immediately. At the reception, Ronnie is seated with Scott, Ashley, and Cassie, who ignore her. She doesn't mind and later steps out to the veranda to watch the festivities. She reflects on how much she's changed over the summer and how little she misses her old life in New York, clubs, and parties. She thinks about repairing her relationship with her mother. Ashley confronts her, warning that her relationship with Will won't last and that Susan will never accept her. Ronnie threatens Ashley, telling her to leave her alone permanently, and Ashley backs off. Later, Will finds Ronnie on the dock and asks for their dance. Ronnie raises her fears about their future, knowing they will soon be apart. Will reassures her, saying they can make long-distance work and that he loves her. Overwhelmed by emotion, Ronnie agrees to go with him to his dad's boat. As they head that way, Marcus suddenly appears, mocking Will and Ronnie. He taunts Will about Ronnie's court case and throws a fireball. Will lunges after him, and Marcus leads him toward the tent supports. Ronnie screams for Will to stop, but it's too late. Will collides with Marcus, pulling down part of the tent. Chaos erupts, guests scream, and ice sculptures topple. Marcus escapes. Afterward, Ronnie sits alone in the study while Susan yells at Will, blaming Ronnie for ruining the wedding and calling her low class. Susan reveals that Judge Chambers recognized Ronnie and told her about Ronnie's upcoming court case. Ronnie feels sick, realizing the judge was the older man who had been watching her. Tom offers to drive Ronnie home. Ronnie asks him to tell Will goodbye and that she won't see him again. Ronnie returns home silently, devastated, and cries herself to sleep. The next morning, Jonah wakes her to say someone is outside asking for her. It's Megan. Megan tells Ronnie she didn't ruin the wedding and blames Marcus instead. Megan explains she talked to Will and believes Ronnie when Ronnie admits she loves Will and that it isn't just a summer fling. Megan encourages Ronnie to talk to Will and tells her Will is at the volleyball tournament, upset and exhausted. Ronnie rushes to the beach where the tournament is underway. After struggling through the crowd, she finds Will alone near the bleachers. Without time to explain, she hugs and kisses him, then tells him she loves him and didn't mean what she said to his father. She asks him to play his best game. Marcus sits at Bowers Point, kicking at the sand and reflecting on the chaos he caused the previous night. He knows everything unfolded exactly as he planned. He had followed newspaper descriptions of the Blakely wedding preparations and loosened the tent pegs during dinner so they would pull free when he hit the ropes. Watching Ronnie walk to the dock with Will had pleased him, and Will's reaction had been entirely predictable. Marcus thinks of people as buttons to push, and Will had behaved exactly as expected. The manipulation had been satisfying and exhilarating. Marcus reflects that he has always known he is different from other people. He feels no guilt about what he does and takes pride in the freedom he feels doing whatever he wants. The sense of power gives him pleasure, though it usually fades quickly. The previous night, however, the rush had been stronger than usual, making him feel more alive than he had in months. Normally, after one of his projects, he feels content for weeks, which helps him avoid getting caught. He believes he is careful and intelligent. Now, though, Marcus feels uneasy. He worries he may have gone too far by targeting the Blakeleys, who are wealthy, influential, and well-connected. If they ever discovered his involvement, he knows they would do everything possible to see him imprisoned. He wonders whether Will, who has protected Scott in the past, would still stay silent after what happened at his sister's wedding. The thought unsettles Marcus. The feeling is close to fear, something he hates. He is terrified of going to prison and imagines it as unbearable. Confinement, guards, violent inmates, filthy food, and humiliation. While he feels nothing about the buildings he has burned or the people he has hurt, the idea of prison makes him feel sick. He reminds himself that things are calm for now. There are no police swarming Bowers Point, which means Will hasn't named him. Still, Marcus decides he needs to lie low. No parties, no fires, no contact with Will or Ronnie, and no talking to Teddy, Lance, or Blaze. Letting memories fade is safest. He considers that the balance of power may have shifted. Where he once controlled Will completely, now Will could potentially expose him. The thought pushes Marcus toward the idea of leaving town altogether. He considers heading south to Myrtle Beach, Fort Lauderdale, or Miami, until the wedding incident fades. To do that, he needs money, and quickly. He decides the beach volleyball tournament starting that day offers an opportunity. Large crowds mean good money, and he can perform his fire show on the pier without going near the courts where Will be playing. He plans a bigger-than-usual performance. Behind him, Blaze sits nearby in the sun, wearing only jeans and her bra, her shirt discarded near the campfire. Marcus tells her they will need 9 fireballs for the show because the crowd will be large and they need money. Blaze sighs audibly, irritating him. Since being kicked out by her mother, she has been gloomy, and Marcus is tired of her attitude. Still, he watches as she gets up and takes the lighter fluid, at least doing something useful. Marcus thinks about increasing the number of fireballs beyond their usual 6 to draw more attention and earn more cash. With enough money, he plans to leave for Florida within a couple of days, abandoning Teddy, Lance, and Blaze, whom he is already sick of. As Blaze begins soaking cloth balls in lighter fluid, doing so directly over the shirt she will later wear, Marcus is focused only on his escape plan and barely notices the potential danger. Will and Scott dominate the early rounds of the beach volleyball tournament. They win their first game easily, barely exerting themselves, and the second is even more one-sided, with their opponents scoring only a single point. The third round requires more effort, and although the final score looks lopsided, Will recognizes that the opposing team is stronger than the numbers suggest. By the quarterfinals, which begin at 2 in the afternoon, Will feels completely locked in. Even when they fall behind early, he feels fast, confident, and in control, placing every shot exactly where he intends. During one rally, Scott sets the ball perfectly and Will spikes it home, and they go on a run, winning 6 consecutive points. As Will waits for the next serve, he scans the crowd and spots Ronnie in the bleachers, seated away from his parents and Megan. He reflects on his decision to lie to his mother about Marcus. He knows that if Marcus were exposed, Scott's past crime would come to light, jeopardizing Scott's scholarship chances and hurting both families. Because of that, he stayed silent, and his mother blamed Ronnie instead. Despite this, Ronnie came to him that morning, told him she loved him, and urged him to focus on playing his best. Will continues to play at an exceptional level. In the quarterfinal match, their opponents score only a few points before losing. Will and Scott advance to the semifinals, with Ronnie cheering in the stands. The semifinal proves to be their hardest match so far. They win the first game easily, lose the second in a tiebreaker, and head into a deciding third game. Will notices how much larger the crowd is than in previous years, filling the bleachers and lining the pier. In the semifinals final game, Will serves aggressively, splitting the opposing team and scoring an easy point. He serves 7 times in a row, putting them comfortably ahead, and they win the match without much trouble. Scott congratulates him, confident they will win the final. Their opponents in the final are Tyson and Landry, a dominant junior team from California with an international reputation. Scott and Will had been badly beaten by them the year before, but this time the match is evenly contested. Each team wins 1 game and the final game is tied at 7. Despite hours in the sun, Will feels energized and focused, sensing they have a real chance to win the tournament. As the game continues, Scott's serve forces an error, giving them the lead. Will looks toward Ronnie, who waves back, then toward his family. He notices activity on the pier and sees a fireball arc through the air. Later, with the score tied at 12, another ball goes into the crowd, and Will looks up at the pier, knowing Marcus is there. Seeing Marcus reignites the anger from the night before. He remembers Megan's advice to let it go, but he also knows he is playing partly for her. From the court, Will sees Marcus performing with Teddy and Lance, and notices Blaze juggling fireballs with Marcus. The fireballs are moving faster than usual, and Blaze is retreating toward the pier railing. When she misjudges a catch, one fireball ignites her shirt, soaked with lighter fluid. As she panics and tries to beat out the flames while still holding another fireball, her hands catch fire as well. Her screams overwhelm the crowd as flames engulf her. Will instinctively sprints off the court toward the pier, racing through the sand and pushing through the crowd. He reaches Blaze, whose shirt has melted into her burned skin. Marcus and the others are gone. No one seems to know what to do. Knowing an ambulance will take too long, Will lifts Blaze into his arms and carries her toward his truck. Ronnie meets him on the way, and he shouts instructions to her to get the keys and call the hospital. They load Blaze into the back seat and race to the emergency room, breaking traffic laws in the process. At the hospital, Blaze is rushed into surgery. Will and Ronnie sit together, shaken, holding hands in silence. Will speaks to police officers, explaining why he brought Blaze himself instead of waiting for paramedics, and they seem to understand. Blaze's mother arrives, terrified, and thanks Will before being taken back to see her daughter. She breaks down, blaming Marcus and herself for what happened, and Ronnie comforts her. After Blaze's mother leaves, Will abruptly storms out of the hospital, and Ronnie follows him into the truck. He drives fast and aggressively toward Bowers Point. Ronnie begs him to stop, but Will gets out of the truck and runs along the beach. He finds Marcus, Teddy, and Lance sitting around a campfire. Overcome with rage, Will attacks them. He tackles Marcus, incapacitates Teddy with a headbutt, knocks Lance unconscious with a knee to the face, and then brutally beats Marcus, headbutting and punching him repeatedly. Ronnie arrives and pleads with Will to stop, warning him not to ruin his life. Gradually, his rage subsides, and he allows her to pull him away. The next morning at work, Scott confronts Will in the locker room. Scott is furious that Will quit the match and forfeited their chance to win the tournament, accusing him of playing hero unnecessarily. Scott argues that Blaze didn't matter to him and insists that Will should have waited for paramedics. Will counters that Blaze needed immediate help. The argument escalates, with Scott accusing Will of always acting on his own terms and throwing away Scott's future. Scott claims the paramedics told him Will may have made Blaze's injuries worse. Will responds angrily, saying that saving a life is more important than a scholarship. Scott accuses Will of betraying him after all he's done. Will finally tells Scott that things have changed and that Scott needs to tell the truth about his crime. He leaves the locker room, ignoring Scott's shouts and protests, as Scott slams lockers behind him. The week that followed was uneasy and emotionally charged for both Ronnie and Will. Ronnie struggled to reconcile what she had witnessed at Bowers Point. She disliked violence and believed it usually made situations worse, yet she couldn't bring herself to be angry at Will. Watching him overpower Marcus, Teddy, and Lance had unsettled her, but it had also made her feel safer with him, a realization that disturbed her just as much as the fight itself. Will, meanwhile, was deeply tense. He expected the police to show up at any moment, convinced Marcus might report the beating. But Ronnie sensed that his anxiety ran deeper than fear of arrest. Something else was troubling him. She noticed that Will and Scott were no longer speaking, and she suspected their falling out was a major source of Will's stress. Adding to the strain was Will's family, especially his mother. Ronnie encountered Susan twice after the wedding, once while waiting in Will's truck outside his house and once at a restaurant in Wilmington. Both times, Susan deliberately turned her back on Ronnie. Ronnie didn't tell Will about these incidents, sensing he already had too much on his mind. She also sensed that Susan blamed her personally for what had happened to Blaze. One night, Ronnie watched Will sleeping outside near the turtle nest. With nearby nests already hatching, the protective cage had been removed, leaving the nest exposed. Will had volunteered to watch it overnight, partly because he was rarely home anymore. Standing in her room, Ronnie reflected on the summer. How unrecognizable her old self felt, how much had changed. She would turn 18 in just days. Will would leave for Vanderbilt soon after. Her next court appearance loomed, followed by her return to New York. Everything felt both finished and unresolved. Her life felt more real than it ever had. Her love for Will, her renewed bond with her father, the slower rhythm of life at the beach. Manhattan now seemed distant and unreal by comparison. Despite everything, the danger, the fear, the heartbreak, she knew this summer would remain unforgettable. As she drifted to sleep, she felt certain something else was coming, though she believed the worst must already be behind them. The next morning, however, she woke with a heavy sense of anxiety. It wasn't just that time with Will was slipping away. Everyone around her, Kayla, was moving on to college while she had no clear future. She wondered what would happen after her court date. Would she live with her mother indefinitely? Work a meaningless job? The first time in her life, she seriously confronted the fear of standing still while everyone else moved forward. Later that morning, she and Will sat together on the pier, sharing bagels and coffee in rare solitude. Will noticed her quiet mood and asked what was wrong. She brushed it off, joking vaguely, until he reminded her that her 18th birthday was the next day. Though he meant well, the reminder only heightened her sense that time was running out. Will tried to cheer her up by suggesting birthday plans. Dinner, dancing, absurd rituals, but she barely listened, lost in her thoughts. Eventually, when he asked what she truly wanted for her birthday, she realized her answer wasn't about gifts or celebration. 2 nights later, on Friday, August 22nd, her wish came true. The turtle nest finally began to hatch. Aquarium staff and volunteers prepared the area carefully, smoothing a trench to the ocean and setting up caution tape to hold back a massive crowd. Ronnie wore her aquarium uniform and answered endless questions from onlookers, drawing on what she'd learned from Will and the fact cards. Though she'd imagined a quiet moment with only a few people present, hundreds gathered, making the event feel almost like a spectacle. Will sat with her on the dune for a while, joking and offering reassurance that the hatching would happen soon. Later, her father joined her. He talked about how, growing up, turtle hatchings hadn't been a big event, just a part of life, and gently pointed out that she and Will had guarded the nest privately for weeks, only to share the final moment with a crowd. Ronnie admitted that while it felt strange, she didn't mind. They spoke quietly about his music, the nearly finished stained glass window, Jonah, and the summer they'd shared together. Her father told her how proud he was of her, and she leaned against him, deeply grateful for their renewed closeness. Then it began. The crowd fell silent as the first eggs cracked. Ronnie watched in awe as tiny turtles emerged, one after another, the nest suddenly alive with frantic movement. Dozens of hatchlings struggled upward, slipping and climbing over one another until they spilled into the trench and crawled toward the ocean, guided by light. She watched them disappear into the surf, knowing that survival was unlikely for many of them, and that this miracle, weeks in the making, would be over in minutes. Standing beside Will, holding his hand, Ronnie felt overwhelmed by the beauty and fragility of it all. She knew she had never shared anything so magical with anyone. Later, as they walked back together, Will tried to reassure her about the turtle's fate. When she asked him to lie to her, he promised, with total conviction, that all 56 would survive, grow old, and thrive. She laughed, choosing to believe him. Back at the house, Jonah declared the entire experience so cool, making Ronnie laugh again. But the moment shattered when her father suddenly began coughing, deep, wet, uncontrollable coughs that echoed with alarming intensity. He grabbed the porch rail for balance, struggling to breathe. Ronnie froze in terror as the coughing worsened, sounding as if his lungs were filling with liquid. When he finally lowered his hands, Ronnie saw blood covering his face. And in that instant, more frightened than she had ever been in her life, she knew that whatever was coming next would change everything. Steve learned he was dying in February, sitting in a doctor's office an hour after finishing his last piano lesson. After returning to Wrightsville Beach following his failure as a concert pianist, he had resumed teaching piano at Pastor Harris's urging. Pastor Harris brought him a student, Chan Lee, a talented 17-year-old whose technical skill was strong but whose music lacked personal expression. Steve enjoyed teaching her and found purpose in the work, though he grew increasingly fatigued. He began taking long naps, often waking with stomach pain. One evening, while cooking dinner, Steve experienced a sudden, severe pain that caused him to collapse. Medical tests followed, and during repeated hospital visits, he recalled his father's death from cancer and sensed what the diagnosis would be. On his third visit, the doctor confirmed that Steve had stomach cancer that had spread to his pancreas and lungs. The doctor explained there was no cure and spoke about managing quality of life. Steve pressed for a timeline, and although the doctor avoided specifics, Steve understood from the silence that he had less than a year to live. After leaving the office, the reality settled in while Steve stood alone on the beach. He threw away the informational pamphlets he'd been given and watched ordinary people near the pier, struck by how life continued unchanged. He realized the concerns that once mattered, money, career, future relationships, were now meaningless. The weight of the diagnosis overwhelmed him, and he finally broke down, frightened and alone. The next day, Steve canceled his piano lessons with Chan and then told Pastor Harris about his illness. Pastor Harris was still recovering from injuries sustained in the church fire, but Steve had no one else to confide in. They sat together and cried. Walking the beach afterward, Steve thought about what mattered most with the time he had left. Passing the damaged church, he stared at the empty space where the stained glass window once stood and decided he needed to make another one. Steve called Kim and told her about his diagnosis. She wept, while he remained composed, realizing he would never cry about it again. He later asked if the children could spend the summer with him, and although frightened, Kim agreed. At Steve's request, she promised not to tell the children about his illness. He accepted that the summer would be built on deception, believing it was the only way to reconnect with them. As spring arrived, Steve began thinking deeply about God. Facing death made the question unavoidable. He concluded that God existed, but he wanted to experience God's presence in the physical world, and he began searching for it. That year was marked by heavy rain, followed by an unusually dry May. Steve purchased glass and began work on the new window. In June, his children arrived. As the summer unfolded, Steve walked the beach searching for God and found himself repairing his strained relationship with his children. Now, on a dark night in August, as baby turtles hatched and made their way to the ocean, Steve coughed up blood. The pain was intense, and he knew he could no longer hide the truth. Seeing the fear in his children's faces, he tried to remain calm, wiped the blood from his face, and said that he needed to go to the hospital. Ronnie learned the truth while her father lay in a hospital bed, connected to N4. When he told her he was dying, she immediately denied it, insisting that doctors made mistakes. He told her quietly that this time they had not, and apologized for the way she had found out. Will and Jonah were downstairs, because her father wanted to speak to each child separately, but Ronnie didn't want to hear anything more. As the realization set in, memories and clues from the summer suddenly made sense. Why he had wanted the children to come to North Carolina, why her mother had been unusually accommodating, why he had worked obsessively on the stained glass window, why he had coughed in the church and winced in pain. In hindsight, everything fit together, even as her world fell apart. She was overwhelmed by what he would never see: her marriage, grandchildren, her future, and by the thought of living without him. Angry and hurt, she asked when he had planned to tell her, before she left or after she returned to New York. When he didn't answer, her anger sharpened, and she accused him of bringing her there to watch him die. He told her that he had asked her to come so he could watch her live. That answer broke through her anger and the reality of the hospital around her. Nurses, lights, the 4-drip, felt surreal. He apologized again, explaining that he wanted a normal summer for her and a chance to know his daughter again, and asked if she could forgive him. The request shattered her, and she began to cry as she took his hand. She leaned against him, noticing how thin he had become, realizing he had been wasting away for months without her noticing. She remembered how angry she had been when she first arrived and how distant she had once felt from him, and now she was devastated by how deeply she loved him. She clung to him, aware that there would come a time when even this simple closeness would no longer be possible. Later, he answered her questions. He told her about the family history of cancer, his increasing pain earlier in the year, and why radiation and chemotherapy were not viable options. The disease was widespread and aggressive, and treatment would only worsen his condition without stopping the inevitable. He explained the idea of quality of life, and though she hated that he hadn't told her sooner, she knew the summer would have been different if he had. The morphine made him drowsy, and he reassured her that the pain was better for now. He told her he had informed her mother back in February and asked her not to tell the children. Ronnie realized how little attention she had paid then, and she regretted not spending more time with him. She insisted she could have helped him more, but he told her that watching her enjoy the summer and fall in love might have been what kept him going. She understood he didn't expect to live long and struggled to imagine life without him. When she asked what would happen next, he told her he hoped to go home soon. He spoke about finishing the window and completing the song he had been working on. He assured her he would be fine on his own, with Pastor Harris nearby, and mentioned hospice care if it became necessary. The thought made her sick, but he told her he would be home until he couldn't be. She left the room so he could speak to Jonah. Walking through the hospital corridors, she was struck by the ordinary suffering around her and the knowledge that most people would leave, while her father would return. She found Will and Jonah in the cafeteria and told Jonah their father wanted to talk to him alone. Will promised he would wait as long as she needed. As Jonah went into the room, Ronnie reflected on death and memory, recalling how her 7th-grade teacher's death had faded so quickly from people's lives. She feared her father would be forgotten just as easily. She realized how little she truly knew about him, his tastes, his preferences, who he had been when healthy, and felt the loss of that knowledge before he was even gone. Hearing Jonah cry behind the door, she leaned against the wall, helpless and aching. Pastor Harris found her there and spoke gently about her father, explaining how deeply he loved his children and how much he had wanted the summer to be meaningful. He told her how her father had counted down the days until their arrival and prepared the house for them. He reassured her that her father was proud of the young woman she had become and that, despite everything, he had found happiness again. That night, back at the house, Ronnie stood on the porch, feeling how different everything now seemed. Will comforted her, explaining that Jonah didn't yet understand what was happening. Will offered to delay leaving for college to stay with her and Jonah, but Ronnie lashed out, saying he couldn't fix this and couldn't understand. Overwhelmed by guilt, she blamed herself for the years she'd pushed her father away and collapsed into Will's arms, finally letting herself cry. Later, alone in her bedroom, she lay awake listening for the phone to ring, imagining the worst. She found her father's Bible on the nightstand and flipped through it, finding no markings, only evidence that it had been read often. She resolved to read it herself, hoping to understand what it had meant to him. Realizing how much she still didn't know about her father, she decided she would ask him while she still could. As she prayed for the first time in years, she asked only for enough time to make that possible. Will spent a restless night on the couch, listening to Ronnie pace and toss in her room. He recognized the shock she was experiencing. The numbness, guilt, anger, and disbelief, because he remembered feeling the same way after Mikey's death. He felt sadness not only for Ronnie but also for Jonah, who was too young to understand, and even for himself. Over the summer, Ronnie's father, Steve, had been quietly kind to him. Will remembered Steve cooking calmly in the kitchen, spending patient hours with Jonah flying kites, playing catch, or working on the stained glass window. Steve never raised his voice or showed anger, and Will believe this wasn't only because Steve was dying, but because he was simply a good man, at peace with himself, who trusted his children to make their own choices. Will admired him deeply and thought about how different Steve was from his own father, who had often been absent while building his business. Combined with his mother's volatility and Mikey's death, Will's childhood hadn't always felt secure. Steve, by contrast, seemed like the kind of father Will hoped to become someday. He was especially struck by how Steve never mentioned Ronnie's piano playing, even though it had once defined their relationship, and had even boarded up the alcove because Ronnie didn't want reminders. To Will, this silence was proof of Steve's love. In the morning, Will found Ronnie on the porch. She apologized for snapping at him the night before, and they embraced. She told him she had spoken to the hospital and sensed her father was still in pain and might be kept for several more days. She admitted she hadn't slept, not only because of her father, but because Will was leaving soon. Will offered again to postpone college, but Ronnie refused. She told him firmly that this was her burden, not his, and she didn't want him sacrificing his future. Accepting this, Will gave her his macrame bracelet, a meaningful gesture she understood. Their moment was interrupted by Jonah storming out of the workshop in a fury, dragging furniture and bleeding. He was trying desperately to reach the center of the stained glass window and finish it himself, believing that if he completed it, his father would get better. Overwhelmed, Jonah collapsed, sobbing that the window was what he and his dad had done together all summer, while Ronnie only cared about turtles. Ronnie held him quietly, letting him cry without interruption. After tending Jonah's injury, the three returned to the workshop. Jonah showed Will and Ronnie what needed to be done, and together they worked on the final sections of the window. The day passed in heat and exhaustion, punctuated by phone calls to the hospital that brought cautious reassurance. That night, after Jonah fell asleep, Will and Ronnie continued working through the night until the window was finished by dawn. Pastor Harris arrived that morning and was awed by the completed window, running his scarred hand gently over the glass. He told them Steve was doing well and would likely be released soon. After the pastor left, Will reflected on the damage that had made the window's replacement necessary and feared Steve might never see it installed. Sitting together on the dune, Will finally told Ronnie the truth. Scott had accidentally started the church fire, and Will had been protecting him. Ronnie was shocked and furious. She insisted that accident or not, Scott needed to take responsibility and that Will's silence was allowing Marcus to continue controlling them. She reminded Will of the suffering caused by the fire, Pastor Harris's injuries, the destruction of the church, the loss of her father's dream. Will admitted his guilt but said Scott was his friend and he couldn't betray him. Ronnie accused him of selfishness and of lying to her, especially knowing why her father was making the window. Overwhelmed by grief, anger, and betrayal, she told Will she no longer trusted him and ordered him to leave. She ran back to the house, ending their relationship. That night, Will sat alone at home, trying to understand everything that had happened. His father noticed his silence and asked if he was nervous about leaving. Will said no, then finally asked his father if he would do something important for him, no questions asked. In the quiet that followed, Will already knew what the answer would be. Ronnie watched her father talk with Jonah in the hospital room and noticed that he seemed a little stronger than before. He still looked tired, but there was more color in his face and he moved more easily. Jonah excitedly told him that the stained glass window was finished and that he couldn't wait for his dad to see it. Steve was surprised, knowing how many pieces had still been left. Jonah admitted that Ronnie and Will had helped, though only after Jonah showed them what to do, proudly adding that he'd been patient when they made mistakes. Steve smiled at that. Jonah commented on the strange smell in the room and asked about the 4-bag. Steve explained it held medicine and reassured him that he was feeling better. When Jonah asked if he was coming home, Steve said soon, maybe the next day. He then asked Jonah to get him a soda from the cafeteria. Jonah left, and Ronnie handed him some money as he went. Once Jonah was gone, Steve told Ronnie that her lawyer had called and that her court date had been postponed until late October. Ronnie said she couldn't think about that right now. Steve then asked how Jonah was really holding up. Ronnie admitted that Jonah was lost, confused, scared, and barely managing. Steve apologized for ending up in the hospital and for forcing her to see him like this, but Ronnie firmly told him never to apologize and said she was glad she knew the truth. Steve then asked gently about Will, saying he knew Ronnie well enough to sense something else was troubling her and that he knew how much she cared about him. Ronnie said only that Will had gone home to pack. Steve sensed there was more but let it go when she didn't want to talk. Steve told her she looked tired and suggested she go home later to nap, but she wanted to stay. Ronnie then asked him directly if he was in pain. He initially said not much, but when she pressed him to be honest, he admitted that it had hurt before coming to the hospital, starting sometime in March or April. When she asked what he did when it hurt, he said he tried not to think about it and focused on other things. Ronnie realized what he meant and asked if one of those things was playing the piano. She reminded him of the night she'd seen him playing at the church and of Jonah's comment that he'd been sneaking over to play once the piano arrived. She asked if playing had helped because it made the pain less noticeable. After a pause, Steve admitted that it had. Ronnie then asked why he'd built the wall around the piano anyway, and he confirmed that he had. Overcome, Ronnie broke down and leaned against him, crying. Steve tried to comfort her, telling her not to cry and insisting that he had been able to handle the pain back then. He explained that working on the window with Jonah and enjoying the summer with his children had helped him escape the pain. He told her that it had been the best summer of his life, that he'd loved watching her with the turtles, seeing her fall in love, and getting to know her as a young woman. Those things, he said, were what carried him through the summer. Jonah suddenly returned with the soda, and behind him was Ronnie's mother. Steve explained that he'd called her, and she stepped into the room, saying they all needed to talk. The next morning, Ronnie waited in her room for her mother and calmly announced that she wasn't going back to New York. Her mother insisted they'd already discussed it, but Ronnie said her mother had decided alone. Ronnie stated that she was 18 now and couldn't be forced to leave. When her mother argued that caring for Steve wasn't Ronnie's responsibility, Ronnie demanded to know whose responsibility it was and dismissed the idea that Pastor Harris could care for her father physically. She said she didn't care about the past between her parents. Her father was sick and needed her, and she was staying. Her mother asked what Steve had told her, and Ronnie suddenly realized the truth. She asked if it had actually been her mother who'd had the affair, not her father. When her mother didn't deny it, Ronnie understood that her mother had let her believe for years that Steve had abandoned them without reason. She accused her mother of letting her blame her father and of allowing her to stop speaking to him for 3 years. She realized the affair had been with Brian and felt suffocated by the implications. Ronnie said she didn't care about the past anymore but made it clear she wasn't leaving her father. Jonah then walked into the room and, sensing something was wrong, asked if Ronnie was staying. When she said yes, Jonah immediately declared that he was staying too. Ronnie gently told him he couldn't, explaining that unlike her, he had school. Jonah argued that he could go to school there and said he and their dad had talked about it. As their mother moved toward him, Jonah panicked and shouted that it wasn't fair and that he wanted to stay, his fear and desperation finally spilling out. Steve remembers the day everything truly ended for his marriage. Long before anyone spoke the words out loud, he had planned to surprise Kim. While on tour, with a concert finished in Albany and another scheduled in Richmond, he decided, uncharacteristically, to come home early. As he walked near Penn Station during the lunch rush, fate intervened. Through the window of a crowded restaurant, he saw a woman who looked exactly like his wife. She was dressed elegantly, laughing softly across a table from an older gray-haired man. Watching more closely, Steve realized it was Kim. He stood outside and observed in silence. He saw the familiarity between them, the way the man touched the small of her back, the tenderness that came from repetition rather than accident. Then he watched the man kiss her. The sight didn't provoke rage or confrontation. Instead, Steve felt a strange emptiness. He didn't go inside. He didn't make a scene. He simply turned away, returned to Penn Station, and boarded a train to Richmond. That night, in a cheap hotel room, he called Kim as he always did. She answered casually, television noise in the background. She asked if anything exciting had happened. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Steve remembered the man's hand on her back and answered quietly that nothing exciting had happened at all. From that moment on, something fundamental inside him shut down. Now, years later, lying in a hospital bed, those memories return with startling clarity. Kim will be arriving soon with Ronnie and Jonah, and the weight of what's coming terrifies him. Ronnie has already told him she isn't going back to New York. He knows how hard that decision will make things, but he also knows he cannot stop her. The thought of his children watching him waste away, as he once watched his own father, fills him with fear. In the past weeks, Steve has been praying. Not formally, not with folded hands, but in conversation. He doesn't ask to be healed. Instead, he asks about his children. Will they be happy? Where will they live? Will they marry? Will they have families? These simple questions, he realizes, are what Pastor Harris meant by walking and talking with God. Yet Steve still hasn't felt an answer, hasn't felt God's presence, and he knows time is running out. He watches the clock. Kim's plane leaves in less than 3 hours. Jonah will leave the hospital with her, straight to the airport. That knowledge terrifies him more than death itself. Today he will say goodbye to his son for the last time. When Jonah bursts into the room, he runs straight to the bed and collapses into Steve's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Steve holds him tightly, trying to memorize the feel of his son's body, his weight, his warmth. Jonah pleads desperately to stay. He promises to behave, to clean his room, to obey every rule, to be good, if only he can remain with his father. Steve assures him that he already is good, that he always has been. Jonah begs Steve to tell his mother that he wants Jonah to stay. Steve admits the truth, that he wants Jonah there more than anything, but explains gently that Jonah's mother needs him too. At that moment, Jonah's last hope collapses. He sobs again, crying that it isn't fair and that he'll never see his father again. Fighting back tears, Steve asks Jonah to listen. He tells him how proud he is of him, that he is the best son any father could hope for, and that he will grow up to do wonderful things. Jonah tells him he loves him and that he will miss him terribly. Ronnie and Kim stand silently in the doorway, both crying. Steve tells Jonah he will always watch over him. He reminds him of the stained glass window they built together and explains that he calls it God light, because it reminds him of heaven. Every time Jonah sees light shining through a window, any window, Steve wants him to know that it's him, watching, present, loving. He promises that he will always be the light in the window. Jonah nods through his tears as Steve continues to hold him, wishing with everything he has that he could make the pain disappear, knowing that he cannot. Ronnie stays at the hospital after her mother and Jonah leave, sitting beside her father until he falls asleep. They sit together in silence, holding hands and watching clouds drift past the window. Exhausted by Jonah's goodbye, she steps outside for air and encounters Pastor Harris. He asks her to pray with him before seeing her father, and she agrees. After that, she begins praying regularly, not for a cure, which she no longer believes possible after seeing the scans and hearing the doctors, but for strength to help her father and to remain positive around him. When her father is released from the hospital, the first thing she does is take him to see the completed stained glass window. He is stunned and deeply moved, clearly having feared he might not live to see it finished. He misses Jonah intensely and turns away so Ronnie will not see his tears. Once home, he calls Jonah to reassure him that he is feeling better, wanting Jonah to remember the happiness of the summer rather than the coming pain. That evening, he reads from the Bible, and Ronnie asks about his favorite passages. He reads Galatians 5 verse 22, describing the fruits of the Spirit. As she listens, Ronnie realizes that her father's patience, kindness, gentleness, and restraint throughout the summer were not weakness, as she once believed, but the result of a life guided by faith. The next day, a package from her mother arrives, containing 19 unopened letters her father had written to her over the years. Shocked by her past anger, Ronnie reads the first letter, in which her father apologizes for leaving, acknowledges her anger, takes responsibility without blaming anyone, expresses continued love for her, Jonah, and their mother, and asks only for forgiveness when she is ready. In mid-September, Ronnie talks with Pastor Harris about her feeling that she should be doing something more for her father. Pastor Harris explains that sometimes God's guidance comes slowly, and other times it arrives clearly. He reveals that the stained glass window will soon be installed because a benefactor has paid for the rest of the church's repairs. Life settles into a quiet routine. Ronnie spends her days caring for her father, reading with him, and making the most of their remaining time. They visit Orton Plantation Gardens, talk about the summer, and share dinner in Southport. As September ends, her father's condition worsens. He sleeps more than half the day, eats very little, and steadily loses weight. Their walks become shorter and quieter. Ronnie often thinks about Will, still wearing the bracelet he gave her, wondering about his life at college. One day, her father gently raises the subject and says he thought Will was an exceptional young man. Later, Ronnie tells her father everything that happened with Will, the fire, Scott, and Marcus. Her father suggests she may have been too hard on Will and tells her that forgiveness begins with forgiving herself. As her father's illness advances, Ronnie reads and rereads his letters, though she still cannot bring herself to open the final one. His pain increases, his strength fades, and Pastor Harris visits almost daily. By late October and early November, her father is barely mobile, sleeping 17 hours a day, and requires constant assistance. Ronnie begins asking her father questions about his life, his favorite color, his first kiss, writing down his answers so she will have memories beyond the summer. She still feels that something is missing, something she has not yet done. In early November, her father insists on one final trip to the pier. It takes great effort, but when they reach the end, he stands peacefully watching the waves, content simply to share the moment with her. 2 days later, his pain becomes unbearable. He reminds Ronnie of the DNR he signed and asks her to let him go when the time comes. Soon after, the stained glass window is installed at the church. Ronnie's father is present but sleeps through most of it. Pastor Harris assures her that her father was happy. That night, Ronnie finally opens the last letter. In it, her father tells her how proud he is of her, thanks her for staying, calls the summer the best of his life, and expresses his love and gratitude for the woman she has become. As Thanksgiving approaches, her father deteriorates rapidly. Ronnie discovers his unfinished song and begins working on it herself, completing what he could not. One morning, she finds him barely breathing and calls an ambulance. At the hospital, he briefly regains consciousness and asks her to take him home. Remembering everything, she agrees. She calls Blaze, now going by Galadriel, and asks for help. Together, they tear down the plywood wall around the piano, exposing it once more. Ronnie rushes back to the hospital, completes the discharge process, and brings her father home. When he sees the piano revealed, his expression shifts from pain to wonder. Ronnie tells him she has finished his song, their last song, and that she wants to play it for him. He reflects that life is like a song. It begins with mystery, ends with understanding, and it is the middle that holds all the emotion that gives it meaning. As Ronnie plays the song she has finished and perfected, he feels no pain for the first time in months and senses that the questions he has carried for years are finally answered. Listening with his eyes closed, he realizes that his search for God's presence is complete. He understands that God's presence exists everywhere and is experienced by everyone at different moments in life. It was present when he worked on the stained glass window with Jonah, in the weeks he spent reconnecting with Ronnie, and now, in this moment, as she plays their final song together. Looking back, he wonders how he could have missed such a simple truth. God, he realizes, is love in its purest form, and during these last months with his children, he has felt that love as clearly as the music flowing from Ronnie's hands.